Chapter 38 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 38. Lady Anna's Bedside. All December went by, and the neighbours in the houses round spent each his merry Christmas, and the snow and frost of January passed over them, and February had come and nearly gone, before the doctors dared to say that Lady Anna's lover's life was not still in danger. During this long period the world had known all about her illness, as it did know, or pretended to know, the whole history of her life. The world had been informed that she was dying, and had, upon the whole, been really very sorry for her. She had interested the world, and the world had heard much of her youth and beauty, of the romance, too, of her story, of her fidelity to the tailor, and of her persecutions. During these months of her illness the world was disposed to think that the tailor was a fine fellow, and that he ought to be taken by the hand. He had money now, and it was thought that it would be a good thing to bring him into some club. There was a very strong feeling at the Beaufort that if he were properly proposed and seconded he would be elected, not because he was going to marry an heiress, but because he was losing the heiress whom he was to have married. If the girl died, then Lord Lovell himself might bring him forward at the Beaufort. Of all this Daniel himself knew nothing, but he heard, as all the world heard, that Lady Anna was on her deathbed. When the news first reached him, after a fashion that seemed to him to be hardly worthy of credit, he called at the house in Keppel Street and asked the question. Yes, Lady Anna was very ill, but, as it happened, Sarah the lady's maid opened the door, and Sarah remembered the tailor. She had seen him when he was admitted to her young mistress, and knew enough of the story to be aware that he should be snubbed. Her first answer was given before she had bethought herself. Then she snubbed him, and told no one but the Countess of his visit. After that, Daniel went to one of the doctors, and waited at his door with patience till he could be seen. The unhappy man told his story plainly. He was Daniel Thwaite, later tailor, the man from Keswick to whom Lady Anna Lovell was engaged. In charity and loving kindness would the doctor tell him of the state of his beloved one? The doctor took him by the hand and asked him in, and did tell him. His beloved one was then on the very point of death. Whereupon Daniel wrote to the Countess in humble strains, himself taking the letter, and waiting without in the street for any answer that might be vouchsafed. If it was, as he was told, that his beloved was dying, might he be allowed to stand once at her bedside and kiss her hand? In about an hour an answer was brought to him at the area gate. It consisted of his own letter, opened and returned to him without a word. He went away too sad to curse, but he declared to himself that such cruelty in a woman's bosom could exist only in the bosom of a countess. But as others heard early in February that Lady Anna was likely to recover, so did Daniel Thwaite. Indeed, his authority was better than that which reached to the clubs, for the doctor still stood his friend. Could the doctor take a message from him to Lady Anna, but one word? No, the doctor could take no message. That he would not do. But he did not object to give to the lover a bulletin of the health of his sweetheart. In this way Daniel knew sooner than most others when the change took place in the condition of his beloved one. Lady Anna would be of age in May, and the plan of her betrothed was as follows. He would do nothing till that time, and then he would call upon her to allow their banns to be published in Bloomsbury Church, after the manner of the Church of England. He himself had taken lodgings in Great Russell Street, thinking that his object might be aided by living in the same parish. If, as was very probable, he would not be allowed to approach Lady Anna either in person or by letter, then he would have recourse to the law, and would allege that the young lady was unduly kept a prisoner in custody. He was told that such complaint would be an idle wind, coming from him, that no allegation of that kind could obtain any redress unless it came from the young lady herself. But he flattered himself that he could so make it that the young lady would at any rate obtain thereby the privilege of speaking for herself. Let someone ask her what were her wishes, and he would be prepared to abide by her expression of them. In the meantime, Lord Lovell also had been anxious, but his anxiety had been met in a very different fashion. For many days the Countess saw him daily, so that there grew up between them a close intimacy. When it was believed that the girl would die, believed with that sad assurance which made those who were concerned speak of her death almost as a certainty, the Countess, sitting alone with the young Earl, had told him that all would be his if the girl left them. He had muttered something as to there being no reason for that. "Who else should have it?" said the Countess. "Where should it go? Your people, Lovell, have not understood me. It is for the family that I have been fighting, and never ceasing. Though you have been my adversary, it has been all for the Lovells. If it goes, it shall be yours at once. There is no one knows how little I care for wealth myself." Then the girl had become better, and the Countess again began her plots and her plans and her strategy. She would take the girl abroad in May, in April, if it might be possible. They would go, not to Rome then, but to the south of France, and, as the weather became too warm for them, on to Switzerland and the Tyrol. Would he, Lord Lovell, follow them? Would he follow them and be constant in his suit, even though the frantic girl should still talk of her tailor Lovell? If he would do so, as far as money was concerned, all should be in common with them. For what was the money wanted but that the Lovells might be great and noble and splendid? He said that he would do so. He also loved the girl, thought at least during the tenderness created by her illness that he loved her with all his heart. He sat hour after hour with the Countess in Keppel Street, sometimes seeing the girl as she lay unconscious, or failing that she was so, till at last he was daily at her bedside. "You had better not talk to him, Anna," her mother would say, "but of course he is anxious to see you." Then the Earl would kiss her hand, and in her mother's presence she had not the courage, perhaps she had not the strength, to withdraw it. In these days the Countess was not cruelly stern as she had been. Bedside nursing hardly admits of such cruelty of manner. But she never spoke to her child with little tender, enduring words, never embraced her, but was to her a careful nurse rather than a loving mother. Then by degrees the girl got better, and was able to talk. "Mamma," she said one day, "won't you sit by me?" "No, my dear, you should not be encouraged to talk." "Sit by me and let me hold your hand." For a moment the Countess gave way, and sat by her daughter, allowing her hand to remain pressed beneath the bedclothes. But she rose abruptly, remembering her grievance, remembering that it would be better that her child should die broken-hearted by unrelenting cruelty, than be encouraged to think it possible that she should do as she desired. So she rose abruptly and left the bedside without a word. "Mamma," said Lady Anna, "will Lord Lovell be here to-day?" "I suppose he will be here." "Will you let me speak to him for a minute?" "Surely you may speak to him." "I am strong now, mamma, and I think that I shall be well again some day. I have so often wished that I might die." "You had better not talk about it, my dear." "But I should like to speak to him, mamma, without you." "What to say, Anna?" "I hardly know, but I should like to speak to him. I have something to say about money." "Cannot I say it?" "No, mamma, I must say it myself, if you will let me." The Countess looked at her girl with suspicion, but she gave the permission demanded. Of course it would be right that this lover should see his love. The Countess was almost minded to require from Lady Anna an assurance that no allusion should be made to Daniel Thwaite. But the man's name had not been mentioned between them since the beginning of the illness, and she was loath to mention it now. Nor would it have been possible to prevent for long such an interview as that now proposed. "He shall come in if he pleases," said the Countess, "but I hope you will remember who you are, and to whom you are speaking." "I will remember both, mamma," said Lady Anna. The Countess looked down on her daughter's face, and could not help thinking that her child was different from what she had been. There had been almost defiance in the words spoken, though they had been spoken with the voice of an invalid. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, according to his custom, Lord Lovell came, and was at once told that he was to be spoken to by his cousin. "She says it is about money," said the Countess. "About money?" "Yes, and if she confines herself to that, do as she bids you. If she is ever to be your wife, it will be all right, and if not, then it will be better in your hands than in hers. In 3 months' time she can do as she pleases with it all." He was then taken into Lady Anna's room. "Here is your cousin," said the Countess. "You must not talk long, or I shall interrupt you. If you wish to speak to him about the property, as the head of your family, that will be very right, but confine yourself to that for the present." Then the Countess left them and closed the door. "It is not only about money, Lord Lovell." "You might call me Frederick now," said he tenderly. "No, not now. If I am ever well again, and we are then friends, I will do so. They tell me that there is ever so much money, hundreds of thousands of pounds, I forget how much." "Do not trouble yourself about that." "But I do trouble myself very much about it, and I know that it ought to be yours. There is one thing I want to tell you, which you must believe. If I am ever any man's wife, I shall be the wife of Daniel Thwaite." That dark frown came upon his face which she had seen once before. "Pray believe that it is so," she continued. "Mamma does not believe it, will not believe it, but it is so. I love him with all my heart. I think of him every minute. It is very, very cruel that I may not hear from him or send one word to tell him how I am. There. My hand is on the Bible, and I swear to you that if I am ever the wife of any man, I will be his wife." He looked down at her, and saw that she was wan and thin and weak, and he did not dare to preach to her the old family sermon as to his rank and station. "But, Anna, why do you tell me this now?" he said. "That you may believe it, and not trouble yourself with me any more. You must believe it when I tell you so in this manner. I may perhaps never live to rise from my bed. If I get well, I shall send to him, or go. I will not be hindered. He is true to me, and I will be true to him. You may tell mamma if you think proper. She would not believe me, but perhaps she may believe you. But, Lord Lovell, it is not fit that he should have all this money. He does not want it, and he would not take it. Till I am married, I may do what I please with it, and it shall be yours." "That cannot be." "Yes, it can. I know that I can make it yours if I please. They tell me that you are not rich, as Lord Lovell should be, because all this has been taken from you. That was the reason why you came to me." "By heaven, Anna, I love you most truly." "It could not have been so when you had not seen me. Will you take a message from me to Daniel Thwaite?" He thought a while before he answered it. "No, I cannot do that." "Then I must find another messenger. Mr. Goff will do it, perhaps. He shall tell me how much he wants to keep, and the rest shall be yours. That is all. If you tell mamma, ask her not to be hard to me." He stood over her and took her hand, but knew not how to speak a word to her. He attempted to kiss her hand, but she raised herself on her elbow and shook her head and drew it from him. "It belongs to Daniel Thwaite," she said. Then he left her and did not speak another word. "What has she said?" asked the Countess, with an attempt at smiling. "I do not know that I should tell you." "Surely, Lovell, you are bound to tell me." "She has offered me all her property, or most of it." "She is right," said the Countess. "But she has sworn to me on the Bible that she will never be my wife." "Oh, tush, it means nothing." "Ah, yes, it means much. It means all. She never loved me, not for an instant. That other man has been before me, and she's too firm to be moved." "Did she say so?" He was silent for a moment, and then replied, "Yes, she did say so." "Then let her die," said the Countess. "Lady Lovell!" "Let her die. It will be better. Oh God, that I should be brought to this! And what will you do, my lord? Do you mean to say that you will abandon her?" "I cannot ask her to be my wife again." "What, because she has said this in her sickness, when she is half delirious, while she is dreaming of the words that man spoke to her? Have you no more strength than that? Are you so poor a creature?" "I think I have been a poor creature to ask her a second time at all." "No, not so. Your duty and mine are the same, as should be hers. We must forget ourselves while we save the family. Do not I bear all? Have I not borne everything? Contumely, solitude, ill words, poverty, and now this girl's unkindness? But even yet I will not give it up. Take the property as it is offered." "I could not touch it." "If not for you, then for your children. Take it all, so that we may be the stronger. But do not abandon us now, if you are a man." He would not stay to hear her further exhortations, but hurried away from the house, full of doubt and unhappiness. End of chapter 38. Chapter 39 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 39. Lady Anna's Offer. Early in March, Lady Anna was convalescent, but had not yet left the house in Keppel Street, and the confusion and dismay of the Countess were greater than ever. Lady Anna had declared that she would not leave England for the present. She was reminded that at any rate till the 10th of May she was subject to her mother's control, but by this time her mother's harshness to her had produced some corresponding hardness in her. "Yes, mamma, but I will not go abroad. Things must be settled, and I am not well enough to go yet." The Countess asserted that everything could be arranged abroad, that papers could be sent after them, that Mr. Gough could come out to them, and with much show of authority persisted. She would do anything by which she might be able to remove Lady Anna from the influence of Daniel Thwaite, at the time at which the girl would cease to be subject to her. But in truth the girl had ceased to be subject to her. "No, mamma, I will not go. If you will ask Sergeant Bluestone or Sir William Patterson, I am sure they will say that I ought not to be made to go." There were some terrible scenes, in which the mother was driven almost to desperation. Lady Anna repeated to the Countess all that she had said to Lord Lovell, and swore to her mother with the Bible in hand that if ever she became the wife of any man, she would be the wife of Daniel Thwaite. Then the Countess with great violence knocked the book out of her daughter's grasp, and it was thrown to the other side of the room. "If this is to go on," said the Countess, "one of us must die." "Mamma, I have done nothing to make you so unkind to me. You have not spoken one word of kindness to me since I came from Yoxham." "If this goes on, I shall never speak a word of kindness to you again," said the mother. But in the midst of all this there was one point in which they were agreed, on which they came sufficiently near together for action, though there was still a wide difference between them. Some large proportion of the property at stake was to be made over to Lord Lovell on the day that gave the girl the legal power of transferring her own possessions. The Countess began by presuming that the whole of Lady Anna's wealth was to be so transferred, not from any lack of reverence for the great amount which was in question, but feeling that for all good purposes it would be safer in the hands of the Earl than in those of her own child. If it could be arranged that the tailor could get nothing from his bride, then it might still be possible that the tailor might refuse the match. At any rate, a quarrel might be fostered, and the evil might be staved off. But to this Lady Anna would not assent. If she might act in this business in concert with Mr. Thwaite, she would be able, she thought, to do better by her cousin than she proposed. But, as she was not allowed to learn what were Mr. Thwaite's wishes, she would halve her property with her cousin. As much as this she was willing to do, and was determined to do, acting on her own judgment. More she would not do unless she could see Mr. Thwaite. As it stood, her proposition was one which would, if carried out, bestow something like £10,000 a year upon the Earl. Then Mr. Gough was sent for, and Lady Anna was allowed to communicate her suggestion to the lawyer. "That should require a great deal of thought," said Mr. Gough with solemnity. Lady Anna declared that she had been thinking of it all the time she had been ill. "But it should not be done in a hurry," said Mr. Gough. Then Lady Anna remarked that in the meantime her cousin, the Earl, the head of her family, would have nothing to support his title. Mr. Gough took his leave, promising to consult his partner, and to see Mr. Flick. Mr. Gough did consult his partner, and did see Mr. Flick, and then Sergeant Bluestone was asked his advice, and the Solicitor General. The sergeant had become somewhat tired of the Lovells, and did not care to give any strong advice either in one direction or in the other. The young lady, he said, might of course do what she liked with her own when it was her own, but he thought that she should not be hurried. He pointed it out as a fact that the Earl had not the slightest claim upon any portion of the estate, not more than he would have had if his money had come to Lady Anna from her mother's instead of from her father's relatives. He was still of opinion that the two cousins might ultimately become man and wife, if matters were left tranquil, and the girl was taken abroad for a year or two. Lady Anna, however, would be of age in a few weeks, and must of course do as she liked with her own. But they all felt that everything would at last be ruled by what the Solicitor General might say. The Solicitor General was going out of town for a week or 10 days, having the management of a great case at the Spring Assizes. He would think over Lady Anna's proposition, and say what he had to say when he returned. Lord Lovell, however, had been his client, and he had said from first to last that more was to be done for his client by amicable arrangement than by hostile opposition. If the Earl could get £10,000 a year by amicable arrangement, the Solicitor General would be shown to have been right in the eyes of all men, and it was probable, as Mr. Gough and Mr. Flick felt, that he would not repudiate a settlement of the family affairs by which he would prove to have been a discreet counsellor. In the meantime, it behoved Lord Lovell himself to have an opinion. Mr. Flick, of course, had told him of the offer, which had in truth been made directly to himself by his cousin. At this time his affairs were not in a happy condition. A young earl, handsome and well esteemed, may generally marry an heiress, if not one heiress, then another. Though he be himself a poor man, his rank and position will stand in lieu of wealth. And so would it have been with this young earl, who was very handsome, excellently well esteemed, had it not been that all the world knew that it was his especial business to marry one especial heiress. He could hardly go about looking for other honey, having, as he had, one particular hive devoted by public opinion to himself. After a year or two he might have looked elsewhere, but what was he to do in the meantime? He was well nigh penniless and in debt. So he wrote a letter to his uncle, the parson. It may be remembered that when the uncle and nephew last parted in London there was not much love between them. From that day to this they had not seen each other, nor had there been any communication between them. The horses had been taken away and sold. The rector had spoken to the ladies of his household more than once with great bitterness of the young man's ingratitude, and they more than once had spoken to the rector with a woman's piteous tenderness of the young lord's poverty. But it was all sorrow and distress, for in truth the rector could not be happy while he was on bad terms with the head of his family. Then the young lord wrote as though there had been nothing amiss between them. It had in truth all passed away from his mind. This very liberal offer had been made to him. It amounted to wealth in lieu of poverty, to what would be comfortable wealth even for an earl. 10,000 a year was offered to him by his cousin. Might he accept it? The rector took the letter in good part, and begged his nephew to come at once to Yoxham. Whereupon the nephew went to Yoxham. "What does Sir William say?" asked the rector, who, in spite of his disapproval of all that Sir William had done, felt that the Solicitor General was the man whose influence in the matter would really prevail. "He has said nothing as yet. He is out of town." 10,000 a year. Who was it who made the offer?" "She made it herself." "Lady Anna?" "Yes, Lady Anna. It is a noble offer." "Yes, indeed. But then, if she has no right to any of it, what does it amount to?" "But she has a right to all of it, she and her mother between them." "I shall never believe it, Frederick, never, and not the less so because they now want to bind you to them by such a compromise as this." "I think you look at it in a wrong light, Uncle Charles." Well, I'll say nothing more about it. I don't see why you shouldn't take it. I don't, indeed. It ought to have been yours. Everybody says that. You'll have to buy land, and it won't give you nearly so much then. I hope you'll buy land all the same, and I do hope it will be properly settled when you marry. As to marrying, you'll be able to do much better than that which you used to think of." "We won't talk about that, Uncle Charles," said the Earl. As far as the rector's opinion went, it was clear that the offer might be accepted, but yet it was felt that very much must depend on what the Solicitor General might say. Then Miss Lovel gave her opinion on the matter, which did not altogether agree with that of her brother. She believed in Lady Anna, whereas the rector professed that he did not. The rector and Lady Fitzwarren were perhaps the only two persons who, after all that had been said and done, still maintained that the Countess was an impostor, and that Lady Anna would only be Anna Murray if everybody had his due. Miss Lovel was quite as anxious on behalf of the Earl as was her brother, but she clung to the hope of a marriage. "I still think it might all come right if you would only wait," said Aunt Julia. "It's all very well talking of waiting, but how am I to live?" "You could live here, Frederick. There's nothing my brother would like so much. I thought he would break his heart when the horses were taken away. It would only be for a year." "What would come of it?" "At the end of the year she would be your wife." "Never," said the Earl. "Oh, young men are so impatient." "Never, under any circumstances, would I ask her again. You may make up your mind about that. As sure as you stand there, she will marry Daniel Thwaite if she lives another 12-month. "You really think so, Frederick?" "I am sure of it. After what she said to me, it would be impossible I should doubt it." "And she will be Lady Anna Thwaite? Oh dear, how horrible! I wish she had died when she was ill, I do indeed. A journeyman tailor! But something will prevent it. I really think that Providence will interfere to prevent it." But in reference to the money, she gave in her adhesion. If the great lawyer said that it might be taken, then it should be taken. Chapter 40 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 40. No disgrace at all. Before the Solicitor General returned to town, things had come to a worse pass than ever. Lady Lovel had ordered her daughter to be ready to start to Paris by a certain hour on a certain day, giving her 3 days for preparation, and Lady Anna had refused to go. Whereupon the Countess had caused her own things to be packed up, and those of her daughter. Sarah was now altogether in the confidence of the Countess, so that Lady Anna had not even dominion over her own clothes. The things were stowed away, and all the arrangements were made for the journey. But Lady Anna refused to go, and when the hour came could not be induced to get into the carriage. The lodgings had been paid for to the day, and given up, so that the poor old woman in Keppel Street was beside herself. Then the Countess, of necessity, postponed her journey for 24 hours, telling her daughter that on the next day she would procure the assistance of magistrates and force the rebel to obedience. Hardly a word had been spoken between the mother and daughter during those 3 days. There had been messages sent backwards and forwards, and once or twice the Countess had violently entered Lady Anna's bedroom, demanding submission. Lady Anna was always on the bed when her mother entered, and there lying would shake her head, and then with sobs accuse the Countess of unkindness. Lady Lovell had become furious in her wrath, hardly knowing what she herself did or said, always asserting her own authority, declaring her own power, and exclaiming against the wicked ingratitude of her child. This she did till the young waiting woman was so frightened that she was almost determined to leave the house abruptly, though keenly alive to the profit and glory of serving a violent and rich countess. And the old lady who let the lodgings was intentionally anxious to be rid of her lodgers, though her money was scrupulously paid, and no questions asked as to extra charges. Lady Anna was silent and sullen. When left to herself, she spent her time at her writing-desk, of which she had managed to keep the key. What meals she took were brought up to her bedroom, so that a household more uncomfortable could hardly be gathered under a roof. On the day fixed for the departure, which did not take place, the Countess wrote to Mr. Gough for assistance, and Lady Anna, by the maid of the mistress of the house, wrote to Sergeant Bluestone. The letter to Mr. Gough was the first step taken towards obtaining that assistance from civil authorities to which the Countess thought herself to be entitled, in order that her legal dominion over her daughter might be enforced. Lady Anna wrote to the sergeant, simply begging that he would come to see her, putting her letter open into the hands of the landlady. She implored him to come at once, and as it happened, he called in Keppel Street that night, whereas Mr. Gough's visit was not made till the next morning. He asked for the Countess, and was shown into the drawing-room. The whole truth was soon made clear to him, for the Countess attempted to conceal nothing. Her child was rebelling against authority, and she was sure that the sergeant would assist her in putting down and conquering such pernicious obstinacy. But she found at once that the sergeant would not help her. "But Lady Anna will be herself of age in a day or two," he said. "Not for nearly 2 months," said the Countess indignantly. "My dear Lady Lovell, under such circumstances you can hardly put constraint upon her." "Why not? She is of age, or she is not. Till she be of age, she is bound to obey me." "True, she is bound to obey you after a fashion, and so indeed she would be had she been of age a month since. But such obligations here in England go for very little, unless they are supported by reason." "The law is the law." "Yes, but the law will be all in her favour before you get it to assist you, even if you could get its assistance. In her peculiar position it is rational that she should choose to wait till she be able to act for herself. Very great interests will be at her disposal, and she will of course wish to be near those who can advise her." "I am her only guardian. I can advise her." The sergeant shook his head. "You will not help me, then?" "I fear I cannot help you, Lady Lovell." "Not though you know the reasons which induce me to take her away from England before she slips entirely out of my hands and ruins all our hopes?" But still the sergeant shook his head. "Everyone is leagued against me," said the Countess, throwing up her hands in despair. Then the sergeant asked permission to visit Lady Anna, but was told that he could not be allowed to do so. She was in bed, and there was nothing to make it necessary that she should receive a visit from a gentleman in her bedroom. "I am an old man," said the sergeant, "and have endeavoured to be a true and honest friend to the young lady. I think, Lady Lovell, that you will do wrong to refuse my request. I tell you fairly that I shall be bound to interfere on her behalf. She has applied to me as her friend, and I feel myself constrained to attend to her application." "She has applied to you?" "Yes, Lady Lovell. There is her letter." "She has deceived me again," said the Countess, tearing the letter into atoms. But the sergeant so far frightened her that she was induced to promise that Mrs. Bluestone should see Lady Anna on the following morning, stipulating, however, that Mrs. Bluestone should see herself before she went upstairs. On the following morning Mr. Gough came early, but Mr. Gough could give his client very little comfort. He was, however, less uncomfortable than the sergeant had been. He was of opinion that Lady Anna certainly ought to go abroad in obedience to her mother's instructions, and was willing to go to her and tell her so, with what solemnity of legal authority he might be able to assume. But he could not say that anything could be done absolutely to enforce obedience. Mr. Goff suggested that perhaps a few gentle words might be successful. "Gentle words," said the Countess, who had become quite unable to restrain herself. "The harshest words are any too gentle for her. If I had known what she was, Mr. Goff, I would never have stirred in this business. They might have called me what they would, and it would have been better." When Mr. Goff came downstairs, he had not a word to say more as to the efficacy of gentleness. He simply remarked that he did not think the young lady could be induced to go, and suggested that everybody had better wait till the Solicitor General returned to town. Then Mrs. Bluestone came, almost on the heels of the attorney. Poor Mrs. Bluestone, who now felt that it was a dreadful grievance both to her and to her husband that they had had anything to do with the Lovell family. She was very formal in her manner, and, to tell the truth for her, rather frightened. The sergeant had asked her to call and see Lady Anna Lovell. Might she be permitted to do so? Then the Countess burst forth with a long story of all her wrongs, with the history of her whole life, not beginning with her marriage, but working back to it from the intense misery and equally intense ambition of the present hour. She told it all. How everybody had been against her, how she had been all alone at the dreary Grange in Westmoreland, how she had been betrayed by her husband and turned out to poverty and scorn, how she had borne it all for the sake of the one child who was, by God's laws and man's, the heiress to her father's name, how she had persevered, intermingling it all with a certain worship of high honours and hereditary position with which Mrs. Bluestone was able to some degree to sympathize. She was clever, and words came to her freely. It was almost impossible that any hearer should refuse to sympathize with her, any hearer who knew that her words were true. And all that she told was true. The things which she narrated had been done, the wrongs had been endured, and the end of it all, which she feared, was imminent. And the hearer thought, as did the speaker, as to the baseness of this marriage with the tailor, thought, as did the speaker, of the excellence of the marriage with the lord. But still there was something in the woman's eye, something in the tone of her voice, something in the very motion of her hands as she told her story, which made Mrs. Bluestone feel that Lady Anna should not be left under her mother's control. It would be very well that the Lovell family should be supported, and that Lady Anna should be kept within the pale of her own rank, but there might be things worse than Lady Anna's defection, and worse even than the very downfall of the Lovells. After sitting for nearly 2 hours with the Countess, Mrs. Bluestone was taken upstairs. "Mrs. Bluestone has come to see you," said the Countess, not entering the room and retreating again immediately as she closed the door. "This is very kind of you, Mrs. Bluestone," said Lady Anna, who was sitting crouching in her dressing-gown over the fire. "But I thought that perhaps the sergeant would come." The lady, taken off her guard, immediately said that the sergeant had been there on the preceding evening. "Mamma would not let me see him, but you will help me." In the interview, as in that below, a long history was told to the visitor, and was told with an eloquent energy which he certainly had not expected. "They talked to me of ladies," said Lady Anna. "I was not a lady. I knew nothing of ladies and their doings. I was a poor girl, friendless but for my mother, sometimes almost without shoes to my feet, often ragged, solitary, knowing nothing of ladies. Then there came one lad who played with me, and it was mamma who brought us together. He was good to me when all others were bad. He played with me, and gave me things, and taught me, and loved me. Then when he asked me to love him again, and to love him always, was I to think that I could not, because I was a lady? You despise him because he is a tailor. A tailor was good to me when no one else was good. How could I despise him because he was a tailor? I did not despise him, but I loved him with all my heart." "But when you came to know who you were, Lady Anna—" Yes, I came to know who I was, and they brought my cousin to me, and told me to love him, and bade me to be a lady indeed. I felt it too for a time. I thought it would be pleasant to be a countess, and to go among great people, and he was pleasant, and I thought that I could love him too, and do as they bade me. But when I thought of it much, when I thought of it alone, I hated myself. In my heart of hearts I loved him who had always been my friend, and when Lord Lovell came to me at Bolton and said that I must give my answer then, I told him all the truth. I am glad I told him the truth. He should not have come again after that. If Daniel is so poor a creature because he is a tailor, must not I be poor who love him? And what must he be when he comes to me again after that? When Mrs. Bluestone descended from the room, she was quite sure that the girl would become Lady Anna Thwaite, and told the Countess that such was her opinion. "By the God above me," said the Countess, rising from her chair, "by the God above me, she never shall." But after that the Countess gave up her project of forcing her daughter to go abroad. The old lady of the house was told that the rooms would still be required for some weeks to come, perhaps for months, and, having a conference on the subject with Mrs. Bluestone, did not refuse her consent. At last Sir William returned to town, and was besieged on all sides, as though in his hands lay the power of deciding what should become of all the Lovell family. Mr. Gough was as confidential with him as Mr. Flick, and even Sergeant Bluestone condescended to appeal to him. The young Earl was closeted with him on the day of his return, and he had found on his desk the following note from the Countess. "The Countess Lovell presents her compliments to the Solicitor General. The Countess is very anxious to leave England with her daughter, but has hitherto been prevented by her child's obstinacy. Sir William Paterson is so well aware of all the circumstances that he no doubt can give the Countess advice as to the manner in which she should proceed to enforce the obedience of her daughter. The Countess Lovell would feel herself unwarranted in thus trespassing on the Solicitor General, were it not that it is her chief anxiety to do everything for the good of Earl Lovell and the family." "Look at that, my lord," said the Solicitor General, showing the Earl the letter. "I can do nothing for her." "What does she want to have done?" "She wants to carry her daughter away beyond the reach of Mr. Thwaite. I'm not a bit surprised, but she can't do it. The days are gone by when a mother could lock her daughter up or carry her away, at any rate in this country." "It is very sad." "It might have been much worse. Why should she not marry Mr. Thwaite? Let them make the settlement as they propose, and then let the young lady have her way. She will have her way, whether her mother lets her or no." "It will be a disgrace to the family, Sir William." "No disgrace at all. How many peers' daughters marry commoners in England? It is not with us as it is with some German countries, in which noble blood is separated as by a barrier from blood that is not noble. The man, I am told, is clever and honest. He'll have great means at his command, and I do not see why he should not make as good a gentleman as the best of us. At any rate, she must not be persecuted." Sir William answered the Countess's letter as a matter of course, but there was no comfort in his answer. "The Solicitor General presents his compliments to the Countess Lovell. With all the will in the world to be of service, he fears that he can do no good by interfering between the Countess and Lady Anna Lovell. If, however, he may venture to give advice, he would suggest to the Countess that, as Lady Anna will be of age in a short time, no attempt should now be made to exercise a control which must cease when that time shall arrive." "They are all joined against me," said the Countess, when she read the letter, "every one of them. But still it shall never be. I will not live to see it." Then there was a meeting between Mr. Flick and Sir William. Mr. Flick must inform the ladies that nothing could be done till Lady Anna was of age, that not even could any instructions be taken from her before that time as to what should subsequently be done. If, when that time came, she should still be of a mind to share with her cousin the property, she could then instruct Mr. Gough to make out the necessary deeds. All this was communicated by letter to the Countess. but Mr. Gough especially requested that the letter might be shown to Lady Anna, and that he might receive a reply intimating that Lady Anna understood its purport. If necessary, he would call upon Lady Anna in Keppel Street. After some delay and much consideration, the Countess sent the attorney's letter to her daughter, and Lady Anna herself wrote a reply. She perfectly understood the purport of Mr. Gough's letter, and would thank Mr. Gough to call upon her on the Chapter 41 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 41. Nearer and Nearer. So they went on living in utter misery till the month of May had come round, and Lady Anna was at last pronounced to be convalescent. Late one night, long after midnight, the Countess crept into her daughter's room and sat down by the bedside. Lady Anna was asleep, and the Countess sat there and watched. At this time the girl had passed her birthday, and was of age. Mr. Gough had been closeted with her and with her mother for 2 mornings running. Sir William Patterson had also been with them, and instructions had been given as to the property, upon which action was to be at once taken. Of that proportion of the estate which fell to Lady Anna, 1 entire moiety was to be made over to the Earl. While this was being arranged, no word was said as to Daniel Thwaite, or as to the marriage with the lord. The settlement was made as though it were a thing of itself, and they all had been much surprised, the mother, the Solicitor General, and the attorney, at the determination of purpose and full comprehension of the whole affair which Lady Anna displayed. When it came to the absolute doing of the matter, the abandonment of all this money, the Countess became uneasy and discontented. She also had wished that Lord Lovell should have the property, but her wish had been founded on a certain object to be attained, which object was now farther from her than ever. But the property in question was not hers, but her daughter's, and she made no loud objection to the proceeding. The instructions were given, and the deeds were to be forthcoming some time before the end of the month. It was on the night of the 11th of May that the Countess sat at her child's bedside. She had brought up a taper with her, and there she sat watching the sleeping girl. Thoughts wondrously at variance with each other, and feelings thoroughly antagonistic, ran through her brain and heart. This was her only child, the one thing that there was for her to love, the only tie to the world that she possessed. But for her girl, it would be good that she should be dead. And if her girl should do this thing which would make her life a burden to her, how good would it be for her to die? She did not fear to die, and she feared nothing after death. But with a coward's dread she did fear the torment of her failure, if this girl should become the wife of Daniel Thwaite. In such a case, most certainly would she never see the girl again, and life then would be all of a blank to her. But she understood that though she should separate herself from the world altogether, men would know of her failure, and would know that she was devouring her own heart in the depth of her misery. If the girl would have but done as her mother had proposed, would have followed after her kind, and taken herself to those pleasant paths which had been opened for her, with what a fond, caressing worship, with what infinite kisses and blessings, would she, the mother, have tended the young Countess, and assisted in making the world bright for the high-born bride. But a tailor! Pho! What a degraded creature was her child to cling to so base a love! She did, however, acknowledge to herself that the girl's clinging was of a kind she had no power to lessen. The ivy to its standard tree is not more loyal than was her daughter to this wretched man. But the girl might die, or the tailor might die, or she, the miserable mother, might die, and so this misery might be at an end. Nothing but death could end it. Thoughts and dreams of other violence had crossed her brain, of carrying the girl away, of secluding her, of frightening her from day to day into some childish, half-idiotic submission. But for that, the tame obedience of the girl would have been necessary, or that external assistance which she had sought in vain to obtain among the lawyers. Such hopes were now gone, and nothing remained but death. Why had not the girl gone when she was so like to go? Why had she not died when it had seemed to be God's pleasure to take her? A little indifference, some slight absence of careful tending, any chance accident would have made that natural which was now so desirable and yet beyond reach. Yes, so desirable. For whose sake could it be wished that a life so degraded should be prolonged? But there could be no such escape. With her eyes fixed on vacancy, revolving it in her mind, she thought that she could kill herself, but she knew that she could not kill her child. But should she destroy herself, there would be no vengeance in that. Could she be alone, far out at sea, in some small skiff, with that low-born tailor, and then pull out the plug, and let him know what he had done to her, as they both went down together beneath the water? That would be such a cure of the evil as would now best suit her wishes. But there was no such sea, and no such boat. Death, however, might still be within her grasp. Then she laid her hand on the girl's shoulder, and Lady Anna awoke. "Oh, mamma, is that you?" "It is I, my child." "Mamma, is anything the matter? Oh, mamma, kiss me." Then the Countess stooped down and kissed the girl passionately. "Dear mamma, dearest mamma." "Anna, will you do one thing for me? If I never speak to you of Lord Lovell again, will you forget Daniel Thwaite?" She paused, but Lady Anna had no answer ready. "Will you not say as much as that for me? Say that you will forget him till I am gone?" "Gone, mamma? You are not going?" "Till I am dead. I shall not live long, Anna. Say at least that you will not see him or mention his name for 12 months. Surely, Anna, will do as much as that for a mother who has done so much for you." But Lady Anna would make no such promise. She turned her face to the pillow and was dumb. "Answer me, my child. I may at least demand an answer." "I will answer you tomorrow, mamma." Then the Countess fell on her knees at the bedside and uttered a long, incoherent prayer, addressed partly to the God of heaven and partly to the poor girl who was lying there in bed, supplicating with mad, passionate eagerness that this evil thing might be turned away from her. Then she seized the girl in her embrace and nearly smothered her with kisses. "My own, my darling, my beauty, my all, save your mother from worse than death if you can, if you can." Had such tenderness come sooner, it might have had deeper effect. As it was, though the daughter was affected and harassed, though she was left panting with sobs and drowned in tears, she could not but remember the treatment she had suffered from her mother during the last 6 months. Had the request for a year's delay come sooner, it would have been granted. But now it was made after all measures of cruelty had failed. 10 times during the night did she say that she would yield, and 10 times again did she tell herself that were she to yield now, she would be a slave all her life. She had resolved, whether right or wrong, still with a strong mind and a great purpose, that she would not be turned from her way. And when she arose in the morning, she was resolved again. She went into her mother's room and at once declared her purpose. "Mamma, it cannot be. I am his, and I must not forget him or be ashamed of his name. No, not for a day." "Then go from me, thou ungrateful one, hard of heart, unnatural child, base, cruel, polluted. go from me, if it be possible, for ever." Then did they live for some days separated for a second time, each taking her meals in her own room. And Mrs. Richards, the owner of the lodgings, went again to Mrs. Bluestone, declaring that she was afraid of what might happen, and that she must pray to be relieved from the presence of the ladies. Mrs. Bluestone had to explain that the lodgings had been taken for the quarter, and that a mother and daughter could not be put out into the street merely because they lived on bad terms with each other. The old woman, as was natural, increased her bills, but that had no effect. On the 15th of May, Lady Anna wrote a note to Daniel Thwaite, and sent a copy of it to her mother before she had posted it. It was in 2 lines. "Dear Daniel, pray come and see me here. If you get this soon enough, pray come on Tuesday after 1. Yours affectionately, Anna." "Tell Mamma," said she to Sarah, "that I intend to go out and put that in the post to-day." The letter was addressed to Wyndham Street. Now the Countess knew that Daniel Thwaite had left Wyndham Street. "Tell her," said the Countess, "tell her. But what of use to tell her anything? Let the door be closed upon her. She shall never return to me any more." The message was given to Lady Anne as she went forth, but she posted the letter, and then called in Bedford Square. Mrs. Bluestone returned with her to Keppel Street, but as the door was opened by Mrs. Richards, and as no difficulty was made as to Lady Anna's entrance, Mrs. Bluestone returned home without asking to see the Countess. This happened on a Saturday, but when Tuesday came, Daniel Thwaite did not come to Keppel Street. The note was delivered in course of post at his old abode, and was redirected from Wyndham Street late on Monday evening, having no doubt given cause there for much curiosity and inspection. Late on the Tuesday it did reach Daniel Thwaite's residence in Great Russell Street, but he was then out, wandering about the streets, as was his wont, telling himself of all the horrors of an idle life, and thinking what steps he should take next as to the gaining of his bride. He had known to a day when she was of age, and had determined that he would allow her 1 month from thence before he would call upon her to say what should be their mutual fate. She had reached that age but a few days, and now she had written to him herself. On returning home he received the girl's letter, and when the early morning had come, the Wednesday morning, the day after that fixed by Lady Anna, he made up his mind as to his course of action. He breakfasted at 8, knowing how useless it would be to stir early, and then called in Keppel Street, leaving word with Mrs. Richards herself that he would be there again at 1 o'clock to see Lady Anna. "You can tell Lady Anna that I only got her note last night very late." Then he went off to the hotel in Albemarle Street, at which he knew that Lord Lovell was living. It was something after 9 when he reached the house, and the Earl was not yet out of his bedroom. Daniel, however, sent up his name, and the Earl begged that he would go into the sitting-room and wait. "Tell Mr. Thwaite that I will not keep him above a quarter of an hour." Then the tailor was shown into the room where the breakfast things were laid, and there he waited. Within the last few weeks very much had been said to the Earl about Daniel Thwaite by many people, and especially by the Solicitor General. "You may be sure that she will become his wife," Sir William had said, "and I would advise you to accept him as her husband. She is not a girl such as we at first conceived her to be. She is firm of purpose and very honest, obstinate if you will, and, if you will, obstinate to a bad end. But she is generous, and let her marry whom she will, you cannot cast her out. You will owe everything to her high sense of honour, and I am much mistaken if you will not owe much to him. Accept them both, and make the best of them. In 5 years he'll be in Parliament, as likely as not. In 10 years he'll be Sir Daniel Thwaite, if he cares for it. And in 15 years Lady Anna will be supposed by everybody to have made a very happy marriage." Lord Lovell was at this time inclined to be submissive in everything to his great adviser, and was now ready to take Mr. Daniel Thwaite by the hand. He did take him by the hand as he entered the sitting-room, radiant from his bath, clad in a short, bright-coloured dressing-gown such as young men then wore o' mornings, with embroidered slippers on his feet, and a smile on his face. "I have heard much of you, Mr. Thwaite," he said, "and am glad to meet you at last. Pray sit down. I hope you have not breakfasted." Poor Daniel was hardly equal to the occasion. The young lord had been to him always an enemy because the lord had been the adversary of the countess and her daughter, an enemy because the lord was an earl, an idol, an enemy because the lord was his rival. Though he now was nearly sure that this last ground of enmity was at an end, and though he had come to the earl for certain purposes of his own, he could not bring himself to feel that there should be good fellowship between them. He took the hand that was offered to him, but took it awkwardly, and sat down as he was bidden. "Thank your lordship, but I breakfasted long since. If it will suit you, I will walk about and call again." "Not at all. I can eat, and you can talk to me. Take a cup of tea, at any rate." The earl rang for another teacup, and began to butter his toast. "I believe your lordship knows that I have long been engaged to marry your lordship's cousin, Lady Anna Lovell." "Indeed, I have been told so." "By herself?" "Well, yes, by herself." "I have been allowed to see her but once during the last 8 or 9 months." "That has not been my fault, Mr. Thwaite." "I want you to understand, my lord, that it is not for her money that I have sought her." "I have not accused you, surely." "But I have been accused. I am going to see her now, if I can get admittance to her. I shall press her to fix a day for our marriage, and if she will do so, I shall leave no stone unturned to accomplish it. She has a right to do with herself as she pleases, and no consideration shall stop me but her wishes." "I shall not interfere." "I am glad of that, my lord." "But I will not answer for her mother. You cannot be surprised, Mr. Thwaite, that Lady Lovell should be averse to such a marriage." "She was not averse to my father's company, nor to mine, a few years since. No, nor 12 months since. But I say nothing about that. Let her be averse. We cannot help it. I've come to you to say that I hope something may be done about the money before she becomes my wife. People say that you should have it." "Who says so?" "I cannot say who. Perhaps everybody. Should every shilling of it be yours, I should marry her as willingly to-morrow. They have given me what is my own, and that is enough for me. For what is now hers, and perhaps should be yours, I will not interfere with it. When she is my wife, I will guard for her, and for those who may come after her, what belongs to her then. But as to what may be done before that, I care nothing." On hearing this, the earl told him the whole story of the arrangement which was then in progress, how the property would in fact be divided into 3 parts, of which the countess would have 1, he 1, and Lady Anna 1. "There will be enough for us all," said the earl. "And much more than enough for me," said Daniel, as he got up to take his leave. "And now I am going to Keppel Street." "You have all my good wishes," said the earl. The 2 men again shook hands. Again the lord was radiant and good-humoured, and again the tailor was ashamed and almost sullen. He knew that the young nobleman had behaved well to him, and it was a disappointment to him that any nobleman should behave well. Nevertheless, as he walked away slowly towards Keppel Street, for the time still hung on his hands, he began to feel that the Chapter 42 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 42. Daniel Thwaite comes to Keppel Street. Even the Bluestones were now convinced that Lady Anna Lovell must be allowed to marry the Keswick tailor, and that it would be expedient that no further impediment should be thrown in her way. Mrs. Bluestone had been told, while walking to Keppel Street with the young lady, of the purport of the letter and of the invitation given to Daniel Thwaite. The sergeant at once declared that the girl must have her own way, and the Solicitor General, who also heard of it, expressed himself very strongly. It was absurd to oppose her. She was her own mistress. She had shown herself competent to manage her own affairs. The Countess must be made to understand that she had better yield at once with what best grace she could. Then it was that he made that prophecy to the Earl as to the future success of the fortunate tailor. And then, too, he wrote at great length to the Countess, urging many reasons why her daughter should be allowed to receive Mr. Daniel Thwaite. "Your ladyship has succeeded in very much," read the Solicitor General, "and even in respect of this marriage you will have the satisfaction of feeling that the man is in every way respectable and well behaved. I hear that he is an educated man, with culture much higher than is generally found in the state of life which he has till lately filled, and that he is a man of high feeling and noble purpose. The manner in which he has been persistent in his attachment to your daughter is in itself evidence of this. And I think that your ladyship is bound to remember that the sphere of life in which he has hitherto been a labourer would not have been so humble in its nature had not the means which should have started him in the world been applied to support and succour your own cause. I am well aware of your feelings of warm gratitude to the father, but I think you should bear in mind, on the son's behalf, that he has been what he has been because his father was so staunch a friend to your ladyship." There was very much more of it, all expressing the opinion of Sir William that the Countess should at once open her doors to Daniel Thwaite. The reader need hardly be told that this was wormwood to the Countess. It did not in the least touch her heart, and had but little effect on her purpose. Gratitude, yes, but if the whole result of the exertion for which the receiver is bound to be grateful is to be neutralized by the greed of the conferrer of the favour, if all is to be taken that has been given and much more also, what ground will there be left for gratitude? If I save a man's purse from a thief, and then demand for my work twice what that purse contained, the man had better been left with the robbers. But she was told not only that she ought to accept the tailor as a son-in-law, but also that she could not help herself. They should see whether she could not help herself. They should be made to acknowledge that she at any rate was in earnest in her endeavours to preserve pure and unspotted the honour of the family. But what should she do? That she should put on a gala dress and a smiling face, and be carried off to church with a troop of lawyers and their wives to see her daughter become the bride of a low journeyman, was of course out of the question. By no act, by no word, by no sign would she give aught of a mother's authority to nuptials so disgraceful. Should her daughter become Lady Anna Thwaite, they two, mother and daughter, would never see each other again. Of so much, at any rate, she was sure. But could she be sure of nothing beyond that? She could at any rate make an effort. Then there came upon her a mad idea, an idea which was itself evidence of insanity, of the glory which would be hers if by any means she could prevent the marriage. There would be a halo round her name were she to perish in such a cause, let the destruction come upon her in what form it might. She sat for hours meditating, and at every pause in her thoughts she assured herself that she could still make an effort. She received Sir William's letter late on the Tuesday, and during that night she did not lie down or once fall asleep. The man, as she knew, had been told to come at 1 on that day, and she had been prepared. But he did not come, and she then thought that the letter which had been addressed to his late residence had failed to reach him. During the night she wrote a very long answer to Sir William, pleading her own cause, expatiating on her own feelings, and palliating any desperate deed which she might be tempted to perform. But when the letter had been copied and folded and duly sealed with the Lovell arms, she locked it in her desk, and did not send it on its way even on the following morning. When the morning came, shortly after 8 o'clock, Mrs. Richards brought up the message which Daniel had left at the door. "Be we to let him in, my lady?" said Mrs. Richards, with supplicating hands upraised. Her sympathies were all with Lady Anna, but she feared the Countess, and did not dare in such a matter to act without the mother's sanction. The Countess begged the woman to come to her in an hour for further instructions, and at the time named, Mrs. Richards, full of the importance of her work, divided between terror and pleasurable excitement, again toddled upstairs. "Be we to let him in, my lady? God, he knows it's hard upon the likes of me, who for the last 3 months doesn't know whether I'm on my head or my heels." The Countess very quietly requested that when Mr. Thwaite should call, he might be shown into the parlour. "I will see Mr. Thwaite myself, Mrs. Richards, but it will be better that my daughter should not be disturbed by any intimation of his coming." Then there was a consultation below stairs as to what should be done. There had been many such consultations, but they had all ended in favour of the Countess. Mrs. Richards, from fear, and the lady's maid from favour, were disposed to assist the elder lady. Poor Lady Anna throughout had been forced to fight her battles with no friend near her. Now she had many friends, many who were anxious to support her, even the Bluestones, who had been so hard upon her while she was along with them. But they who were now her friends were never near her to assist her with a word. So it came to pass that when Daniel Thwaite called at the house exactly at 1 o'clock, Lady Anna was not expecting him. On the previous day at that hour she had sat waiting with anxious ears for the knock at the door which might announce his coming. But she had waited in vain. From 1 to 2, even till 7 in the evening she had waited. But he had not come, and she had feared that some scheme had been used against her. The people at the post office had been bribed, or the women in Wyndham Street had been false. But she would not be hindered. She would go out alone and find him, if he were to be found in London. When he did come, she was not thinking of his coming. He was shown into the dining-room, and within a minute afterwards the Countess entered with stately step. She was well dressed, even to the adjustment of her hair, and she was a woman so changed that he would hardly have known her as that dear and valued friend whose slightest word used to be a law to his father, but who in those days never seemed to waste a thought upon her attire. She had been out that morning walking through the streets, and the blood had mounted to her cheeks. He acknowledged to himself that she looked like a noble and high-born dame. There was a fire in her eye, and a look of scorn about her mouth and nostrils which had even for him a certain fascination, odious to him as were the pretensions of the so-called great. She was the first to speak. "You have called to see my daughter," she said. "Yes, Lady Lovell, I have." "You cannot see her." "I came at her request." "I know you did, but you cannot see her. You can be hardly so ignorant of the ways of the world, Mr. Thwaite, as to suppose that a young lady can receive what visitors she pleases without the sanction of her guardians." "Lady Anna Lovell has no guardian, my lady. She is of age, and is at present her own guardian." "I am her mother, and shall exercise the authority of a mother over her. You cannot see her. You had better go." "I shall not be stopped in this way, Lady Lovell." "Do you mean that you will force your way up to her? To do so you will have to trample over me, and there are constables in the street. You cannot see her. You had better go." "Is she a prisoner?" "That is between her and me, and is no affair of yours. You are intruding here, Mr. Thwaite, and cannot possibly gain anything by your intrusion." Then she strode out into the passage and motioned him to the front door. "Mr. Thwaite, I will beg you to leave this house, which for the present is mine. If you have any proper feeling, you will not stay after I have told you that you are not welcome." But Lady Anna, though she had not expected the coming of her lover, had heard the sound of voices, and then became aware that the man was below. As her mother was speaking, she rushed downstairs and threw herself into her lover's arms. "It shall never be so in my presence," said the Countess, trying to drag the girl from his embrace by the shoulders. "Anna, my own Anna," said Daniel in an ecstasy of bliss. It was not only that his sweetheart was his own, but that her spirit was so high. "Daniel," she said, still struggling in his arms. By this time they were all in the parlour, whither the Countess had been satisfied to retreat to escape the eyes of the women who clustered at the top of the kitchen stairs. "Daniel Thwaite," said the Countess, "if you do not leave this, the blood which will be shed shall rest on your head." And so saying, she drew nigh to the window and pulled down the blind. She then crossed over and did the same to the other blind, and having done so, took her place close to a heavy upright desk which stood between the fireplace and the window. When the two ladies first came to the house, they had occupied only the first and second floors, but since the success of their cause, the whole had been taken, including the parlour in which this scene was being acted, and the Countess spent many hours daily sitting at the heavy desk in this dark, gloomy chamber. "Whose blood shall be shed?" said Lady Anna, turning to her mother. "It is the raving of madness," said Daniel. "Whether it be madness or not, you shall find, sir, that it is true. Take your hands from her. Would you disgrace the child in the presence of her mother?" "There is no disgrace, mamma. He is my own, and I am his. Why should you try to part us?" But now they were parted. He was not a man to linger much over the sweetness of a caress when sterner work was in his hands to be done. "Lady Lovell," he said, "you must see that this opposition is fruitless. Ask your cousin Lord Lovell, and he will tell you that it is so." "I care nothing for my cousin. If he be false, I am true. Though all the world be false, still I will be true. I do not ask her to marry her cousin. I simply demand that she shall relinquish one who is infinitely beneath her, who is unfit to tie her very shoestring." "He is my equal in all things," said Lady Anna, "and he shall be my lord and husband." "I know of no inequalities such as those you speak of, Lady Lovell," said the tailor. "The excellency of your daughter's merits I admit, and am almost disposed to claim some goodness for myself, finding that one so good can love me. But, Lady Lovell, I do not wish to remain here now. You are disturbed." "I am disturbed, and you had better go." "I will go at once, if you will let me name some early day on which I may be allowed to meet Lady Anna alone. And I tell her here that if she be not so permitted to see me, it will be her duty to leave her mother's house and come to me. There is my address, dear." Then he handed to her a paper on which he had written the name of the street and number at which he was now living. "You are free to come and go as you list, and if you will send to me there, I will find you here or elsewhere as you may command me. It is but a short 5 minutes' walk beyond the house at which she was staying in Bedford Square." The Countess stood silent for a moment or two, looking at them, during which neither the girl spoke nor her lover. "You will not even allow her 6 months to think of it?" said the Countess. "I will allow her 6 years if she says she requires time to think of it." "I do not want an hour nor a minute," said Lady Anna. The mother flashed round upon her daughter. "Poor, vain, degraded wretch!" she said. "She is a true woman, honest to the heart's core," said the lover. "You shall come to-morrow," said the Countess. "Do you hear me, Anna? He shall come to-morrow. There shall be an end of this in some way, and I am broken-hearted. My life is over for me, and I may as well lay me down and die. I hope God in his mercy may never send upon another woman, upon another wife or another mother, trouble such as that with which I have been afflicted. But I tell you this, Anna, that what evil a husband can do, even let him be evil-minded as was your father, is nothing to the cruelty of a cruel child. Go now, Mr. Thwaite, if you please. If you will return at the same hour to-morrow, she shall speak to you alone, and then she must do as she pleases." "Anna, I will come again to-morrow," said the tailor. But Lady Anna did not answer him. She did not speak, but stayed looking at him till he was gone. "To-morrow shall end it all. I can stand this no longer. I have prayed to you, a mother to her daughter. I have prayed to you for mercy, and you will show me none. I have knelt to you." "Mamma!" "I will kneel again, if it may avail." And the Countess did kneel. "Will you not spare me?" "Get up, mamma, get up. What am I doing? What have I done that you should speak to me like this?" "I ask you from my very soul, lest I commit some terrible crime. I have sworn that I would not see this marriage, and I will not see it." "If he will consent, I will delay it," said the girl, trembling. "Must I beg to him, then? Must I kneel to him? Must I ask him to save me from the wrath to come? No, my child, I will not do that. If it must come, let it come. When you were a little thing at my knees, the gentlest babe that ever mother kissed, I did not think that you would live to be so hard to me. You have your mother's brow, my child, but you have your father's heart." "I'll ask him to delay it," said Anna. "No, if it be to come to that, I will have no dealings with you. What, that he who has become between me and all my peace, he who with his pretended friendship has robbed me of my all, that he is to be asked to grant me a few weeks' delay before the pollution comes upon me, during which the whole world will know that Lady Anna Lovel is to be the tailor's wife? Leave me. When he comes tomorrow you shall be sent for, but I will see him first. Leave me now. I will be alone." Lady Anna made an attempt to take her mother's hand, but the Countess repulsed her rudely. "Oh, mamma!" "We must be bitter enemies or loving friends, my child. As it is, we are bitter enemies, yes, the bitterest. Leave me now. There is no room for further words between us." Chapter 43 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 43. Daniel Thwaite Comes Again. The Countess Lovel had prepared herself on that morning for the doing of a deed, but her heart had failed her. How she might have carried herself through it had not her daughter come down to them, how far she might have been able to persevere, cannot be said now. But it was certain that she had so far relented that even while the hated man was there in her presence, she determined that she would once again submit herself to make entreaties to her child, once again to speak of all that she had endured, and to pray at least for delay, if nothing else could be accorded to her. If her girl would but promise to remain with her for 6 months, then they might go abroad, and the chances afforded them by time and distance would be before her. In that case she would lavish such love upon the girl, so many indulgences, such sweets of wealth and ease, such store of caresses and soft luxury, that surely the young heart might thus be turned to the things which were fit for rank and high blood and splendid possessions. It could not be but that her own child, the child who a few months since had been as gentle with her and as obedient as an infant, should give way to her as far as that. She tried it, and her daughter had referred her prayer, or had said that she would refer it, to the decision of her hated lover, and the mother had at once lost all command of her temper. She had become fierce, nay ferocious, and had lacked the guile and the self-command necessary to carry out her purpose. Had she persevered, Lady Anna must have granted her the small boon that she then asked. But she had given way to her wrath, and had declared that her daughter was her bitterest enemy. As she seated herself at the old desk where Lady Anna left her, she swore within her bosom that the deed must be done. Even at the moment when she was resolving that she would kneel once more at her daughter's knees, she prepared herself for the work that she must do should the daughter still be as hard as stone to her. "Come again at 1 tomorrow," she said to the tailor, and the tailor said that he would come. When she was alone, she seated herself on her accustomed chair, and opened the old desk with a key that had now become familiar to her hand. It was a huge piece of furniture, such as is never made in these days, but is found among every congregation of old household goods, with numberless drawers clustering below, with a vast body full of receptacles for bills, wills, deeds, and waste paper, and a tower of shelves above, ascending almost to the ceiling. In the centre of the centre body was a square compartment, but this had been left unlocked, so that its contents might be ready to her hand. Now she opened it, and took from it a pistol, and, looking warily over her shoulder to see that the door was closed, and cautiously up at the windows, lest some eye might be spying her action even through the thick blinds. She took the weapon in her hand, and held it up so that she might feel, if possible, how it would be with her when she should attempt the deed. She looked very narrowly at the lock, of which the trigger was already back at its place, so that no exertion of arrangement might be necessary for her at the fatal moment. Never as yet had she fired a pistol. Never before had she held such a weapon in her hand. But she thought that she could do it when her passion ran high. Then, for the 20th time, she asked herself whether it would not be easier to turn it against her own bosom, against her own brain, so that all might be over at once. Ah, yes, so much easier. But how, then, would it be with this man who had driven her, by his subtle courage and persistent audacity, to utter destruction? Could he and she be made to go down together in that boat which her fancy had built for them? Then indeed it might be well that she should seek her own death. But were she now to destroy herself and only herself, then would her enemy be left to enjoy his rich prize, a prize only the richer because she would have disappeared from the world. And of her, if such had been her last deed, men would only say that the mad Countess had gone on in her madness. With looks of sad solemnity but heartfelt satisfaction, all the Lovels, and that wretched tailor, and her own daughter, would bestow some mock grief on her funeral, and there would be an end for ever of Josephine, Countess Lovel, and no one would remember her, or her deeds, or her sufferings. When she wandered out from the house on that morning, after hearing that Daniel Thwaite would be there at 1, and had walked nearly into the mid-city so that she might not be watched, and had bought her pistol and powder and bullets, and had then with patience gone to work and taught herself how to prepare the weapon for use, she certainly had not intended simply to make the triumph of her enemy more easy. And yet she knew well what was the penalty of murder, and she knew also that there could be no chance of escape. Very often had she turned it in her mind whether she could not destroy the man so that the hand of the destroyer might be hidden. But it could not be so. She could not dog him in the streets, she could not get him in his meals, or poison him. She could not creep to his bedside and strangle him in the silent watches of the night. And this woman's heart, even while from day to day she was meditating murder, while she was telling herself that it would be a worthy deed to cut off from life one whose life was a bar to her own success, even then revolted from the shrinking, stealthy step, from the low cowardice of the hidden murderer. To look him in the face and then to slay him, when no escape for herself would be possible, that would have in it something that was almost noble, something at any rate bold, something that would not shame her. They would hang her for such a deed. Let them do it so. It was not hanging that she feared, but the tongues of those who should speak of her when she was gone. They should not speak of her as one who had utterly failed. They should tell of a woman who, cruelly misused throughout her life, maligned, scorned, and tortured, robbed of her own, neglected by her kindred, deserted and damned by her husband, had still struggled through it all till she had proved herself to be that which it was her right to call herself. Of a woman who, though thwarted in her ambition by her own child, and cheated of her triumph at the very moment of her success, had dared rather to face an ignominious death than see all her efforts frustrated by the maudlin fancy of a girl. Yes, she would face it all. Let them do what they would with her. She hardly knew what might be the mode of death adjudged to a countess who had murdered. Let them kill her as they would kill a countess, and the whole world would know her story. That day and night were very dreadful to her. She never asked a question about her daughter. They had brought her food to her in that lonely parlour, and she hardly heeded them as they laid the things before her, and then removed them. Again and again did she unlock the old desk, and see that the weapon was ready to her hand. Then she opened that letter to Sir William Paterson, and added a postscript to it. What I have since done will explain everything." That was all she added, and on the following morning, about noon, she put the letter on the mantel-shelf. Late at night she took herself to bed, and was surprised to find that she slept. The key of the old desk was under her pillow, and she placed her hand on it the moment that she awoke. On leaving her own room, she stood for a moment at her daughter's door. It might be, if she killed the man, that she would never see her child again. At that moment she was tempted to rush into her daughter's room, to throw herself upon her daughter's bed, and once again to beg for mercy and grace. She listened, and she knew that her daughter slept. Then she went silently down to the dark room and the old desk. Of what use would it be to abase herself? Her daughter was the only thing that she could love, but her daughter's heart was filled with the image of that low-born artisan. "Is Lady Anna up?" she asked the maid about 10 o'clock. "Yes, my lady, she's breakfasting now." "Tell her that when Mr. Thwaite comes, I will send for her as soon as I wish to see her." "I think Lady Anna understands that already, my lady." "Tell her what I say." "Yes, my lady, I will, my lady." Then the Countess spoke no further word till, punctually at 1 o'clock, Daniel Thwaite was shown into the room. "You keep your time, Mr. Thwaite," she said. "Working men should always do that, Lady Lovell," he replied, as though anxious to irritate her by reminding her how humble was the man who could aspire to be the son-in-law of a countess. "All men should do so, I presume. I also am punctual. Well, sir, have you anything else to say?" "Much to say to your daughter, Lady Lovell. I do not know that you will ever see my daughter again." "Do you mean to say that she has been taken away from this?" The Countess was silent, but moved away from the spot on which she stood to receive him towards the old desk, which stood open, with the door of the centre space just ajar. "If it be so, you have deceived me most grossly, Lady Lovell. But it can avail you nothing, for I know that she will be true to me. Do you tell me that she has been removed?" "I have told you no such thing." "Bid her come, then, as you promised me." "I have a word to say to you first. What if she should refuse to come?" "I do not believe that she will refuse. You yourself heard what she said yesterday. All earth and all heaven should not make me doubt her, and certainly not your word, Lady Lovell. You know how it is, and you know how it must be." "Yes, I do. She was facing him with her back to the window, and she put forth her left hand upon the open desk, and thrust it forward as though to open the square door which stood ajar. But he did not notice her hand. He had his eye fixed upon her, and suspected only deceit, not violence. "Yes, I know how it must be," she said, while her fingers approached nearer to the little door. "Then let her come to me." "Will nothing turn you away from it?" "Nothing will turn me away from it." Then suddenly she withdrew her hand and confronted him more closely. "Mine has been a hard life, Mr. Thwaite. No life could have been harder. But I have always had something before me for which to long and for which to hope, something which I might reach if justice should at length prevail." "You've got money and rank." "They are nothing, nothing. In all those many years the thing that I have looked for has been the splendour and glory of another, and the satisfaction I might feel in having bestowed upon her all that she owned. Do you think that I will stand by after such a struggle and see you rob me all of it? You who were one of the tools which came to my hand to work with? From what you know of me, do you think that my spirit could stoop so low? Answer me, if you've ever thought of that. Let the eagles alone, and do not force yourself into our nest. You will find, if you do, that you will be rent to pieces." "Oh, this is nothing, Lady Lovell. I came here at your bidding to see your daughter. Let me see her." "You will not go?" "Certainly I will not go." She looked at him as she slowly receded to her former standing ground, but he never for a moment suspected the nature of her purpose. He began to think that some actual insanity had befallen her, and was doubtful how he should act. But no fear of personal violence affected him. He was merely questioning within himself whether it would not be well for him to walk upstairs into the upper room and seek Lady Anna there, as he stood watching the motion of her eyes. "You had better go," said she, as she again put her left hand on the flat board of the open desk. "You trifle with me, Lady Lovell," he answered. "As you will not allow Lady Anna to come to me here, I will go to her elsewhere. I do not doubt but that I shall find her in the house." Then he turned to the door, intending to leave the room. He had been very near to her while they were talking, so that he had some paces to traverse before he could put his hand upon the lock, but in doing so his back was turned on her. In one respect it was better for her purpose that it should be so. She could open the door of the compartment and put her hand upon the pistol without having his eye upon her. But, as it seemed to her at the moment, the chance of bringing her purpose to its intended conclusion was less than it would have been had she been able to fire at his face. She had let the moment go by, the first moment, when he was close to her, and now there would be half the room between them. But she was very quick. She seized the pistol, and transferring it to her right hand, she rushed after him, and when the door was already half opened, she pulled the trigger. In the agony of that moment she heard no sound, though she saw the flash. She saw him shrink and pass the door, which he left unclosed, and then she heard a scuffle in the passage as though he had fallen against the wall. She had provided herself especially with a second barrel, but that was now absolutely useless to her. There was no power left in her wherewith to follow him and complete the work which she had begun. She did not think that she had killed him, though she was sure that he was struck. She did not believe that she had accomplished anything of her wishes, but had she held in her hand a 6-barrelled revolver, as of the present day, she could have done no more with it. She was overwhelmed with so great a tremor at her own violence that she was almost incapable of moving. She stood glaring at the door, listening for what should come, and the moments seemed to be hours, but she heard no sound whatever. A minute passed away, perhaps, and the man did not move. She looked around as if seeking some way of escape, as though, were it possible, she could get to the street through the window. There was no mode of escape, unless she would pass out through the door to the man who, as she knew, must still be there. Then she heard him move, she heard him rise, from what posture she knew not, and step towards the stairs. She was still standing with the pistol in her hand, but was almost unconscious that she held it. At last her eyes glanced upon it, and she was aware that she was still armed. Should she rush after him and try what she could do with that other bullet? The thought crossed her mind, but she knew that she could do nothing. Had all the Lovells depended upon it, she could not have drawn that other trigger. She took the pistol, put it back into its former hiding-place, mechanically locked the little door, Chapter 44 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 44. The attempt and not the deed confounds us. The tailor's hand was on the lock of the door when he first saw the flash of the fire, and then felt that he was wounded. Though his back was turned to the woman, he distinctly saw the flash, but he never could remember that he had heard the report. He knew nothing of the nature of the injury he had received, and was hardly aware of the place in which he had been struck, when he half closed the door behind him, and then staggered against the opposite wall. For a moment he was sick, almost to fainting, but yet he did not believe that he had been grievously hurt. He was, however, disabled, weak, and almost incapable of any action. He seated himself on the lowest stair and began to think. The woman had intended to murder him. She had lured him there with the premeditated intention of destroying him. And this was the mother of his bride, the woman who he intended to call his mother-in-law. He was not dead, nor did he believe that he was like to die. But had she killed him, what must have been the fate of the murderess? As it was, would it not be necessary that she should be handed over to the law and dealt with for the offence? He did not know that they might not even hang her for the attempt. He said afterwards that he thought that he sat there for a quarter of an hour. 3 minutes, however, had not passed before Mrs. Richards, ascending from the kitchen, found him upon the stairs. "What is it, Mr. Thwaite?" said she. "Is anything the matter?" he asked with a faint smile. "The place is full of smoke," she said, "and there is a smell of gunpowder." "There is no harm done, at any rate," he answered. "I thought I heard something go off," said Sarah, who was behind Mrs. Richards. "Did you?" said he. "I heard nothing, but certainly there is a smoke." And he still smiled. "What are you sitting there for, Mr. Thwaite?" asked Mrs. Richards. "You ain't no business to sit there, Mr. Thwaite," said Sarah. "You've been and done something to the Countess," said Mrs. Richards. "The Countess is all right. I'm going upstairs to see Lady Anna, that's all. But I've hurt myself a little. I'm bad in my left shoulder, and I sat down just to get a rest." As he spoke he was still smiling. Then the woman looked at him and saw that he was very pale. At that instant he was in great pain, though he felt that, as the sense of intense sickness was leaving him, he would be able to go upstairs and say a word or two to his sweetheart, should he find her. "You ain't just as you ought to be, Mr. Thwaite," said Mrs. Richards. He was very haggard, and perspiration went on his brow, and she thought that he had been drinking. "I'm well enough," said he, rising, "only that I am much troubled by a hurt in my arm. At any rate, I will go upstairs." Then he mounted slowly, leaving the two women standing in the passage. Mrs. Richards gently opened the parlour door and entered the room, which was still reeking with smoke and the smell of powder, and there she found the Countess seated at the old desk, but with her body and face turned round towards the door. "Is anything the matter, my lady?" asked the woman. "Where is he gone?" "Mr. Thwaite has just stepped upstairs. This moment he was very queer like, my lady." "Is he hurt?" "We think he's been drinking, my lady," said Sarah. "He says that his shoulder is ever so bad," said Mrs. Richards. Then for the first time it occurred to the Countess that perhaps the deed which she had done, the attempt in which she had failed, might never be known. Instinctively she had hidden the pistol and had locked the little door and concealed the key within her bosom as soon as she was alone. Then she thought that she would open the window, but she had been afraid to move, and she had sat there waiting while she heard the sound of voices in the passage. "Oh, his shoulder," said he. "No, he has not been drinking. He never drinks. He's been very violent, but he never drinks." "Well, why do you wait?" "There's such a smell of something," said Mrs. Richards. "Yes, you'd better open the windows. There was an accident. Thank you, that will do." "And is he to be alone with Lady Anna upstairs?" asked the maid. "He is to be alone with her. How can I help it? If she chooses to be a scullion, she must follow her bent. I've done all I could. Why do you wait? I tell you that he is to be with her. Go away and leave me." Then they went and left her, wondering much, but guessing nothing of the truth. She watched them till they had closed the door, and then instantly opened the other window wide. It was now May, but the weather was still cold. There had been rain the night before, and it had been showery all the morning. She had come in from her walk damp and chilled, and there was a fire in the grate. But she cared nothing for the weather. Looking round the room, she saw a morsel of wadding near the floor, and she instantly burned it. She longed to look at the pistol, but she did not dare to take it from its hiding-place, lest she should be discovered in the act. Every energy of her mind was now strained to the effort of avoiding detection. Should he choose to tell what had been done, then indeed all would be over. But had he not resolved to be silent, he would hardly have borne the agony of the wound and gone upstairs without speaking of it. She almost forgot now the misery of the last year, in the intensity of her desire to escape the disgrace of punishment. A sudden nervousness, a desire to do something by which she might help to preserve herself, seized upon her. But there was nothing which she could do. She could not follow him, lest he should accuse her to her face. It would be vain for her to leave the house till he should have gone. Should she do so, she knew that she would not dare return to it. So she sat, thinking, dreaming, plotting, crushed by an agony of fear, looking anxiously at the door, listening for every footfall within the house. and she watched too for the well-known click of the area gate, dreading lest anyone should go out to seek the intervention of the constables. In the meantime, Daniel Thwaite had gone upstairs and had knocked at the drawing-room door. It was instantly opened by Lady Anna herself. "I heard you come. What a time you've been here! I thought that I should never see you." As she spoke, she stood close to him that he might embrace her. But the pain of his wound affected his whole body, and he felt that he could hardly raise even his right arm. He was aware now that the bullet had entered his back, somewhere on his left shoulder. "Oh, Daniel, are you ill?" she said, looking at him. "Yes, dear, I am ill. Not very ill. Did you hear nothing?" "No." "Nor yet see anything?" "No." "I will tell you all another time, only do not ask me now." She had seated herself beside him and wound her arm round his back as though to support him. "You must not touch me, dearest." "You've been hurt." "Yes, I have been hurt. I am in pain, though I do not think that it signifies. I had better go to a surgeon, and then you shall hear from me." "Tell me, Daniel. What is it, Daniel?" "I will tell you, but not now. You shall know all, but I should do harm were I to say it now. Say not a word to anyone, sweetheart, unless your mother asks you." "What shall I tell her?" "That I am hurt, but not seriously hurt, and that the less said the sooner mended. Tell her also that I shall expect no further interruption to my letters when I write to you, or to my visits when I can come. God bless you, dearest. One kiss, and now I will go." "You will send for me if you are ill, Daniel?" "If I am really ill, I will send for you." So saying, he left her, went downstairs, with great difficulty opened for himself the front door, and departed. Lady Anna, though she had been told nothing of what had happened except that her lover was hurt, at once surmised something of what had been done. Daniel Thwaite had suffered some hurt from her mother's wrath. She sat for a while thinking what it might have been. She had seen no sign of blood. Could it be that her mother had struck him in her anger with some chance weapon that had come to hand? That there had been some violence she was sure, and sure also that her mother had been in fault. When Daniel had been gone some few minutes, she went down, that she might deliver his message. At the foot of the stairs, and near the door of the parlour, she met Mrs. Richards. "I suppose the young man has gone, my lady?" asked the woman. "Mr. Thwaite has gone." "And I make so bold, my lady, as to say that he ought not to come here. There's been a doing of some kind, but I don't know what. He says as how he's been hurt, but I'm sure I don't know how he should be hurt here, unless he brought it with him. I never had nothing of the kind here before, long as I've been here. Of course, your title and that is all right, my lady, but the young man isn't fit, that's the truth of it. My belief is he'd been a-drinking, and I won't have it in my house." Lady Anna passed her by without a word, and went into her mother's room. The Countess was still seated in her chair, and neither rose nor spoke when her daughter entered. "Mamma, Mr. Thwaite is hurt." "Well, what of it? Is it much that ails him?" "He's in pain. What has been done, mamma?" The Countess looked at her, striving to learn from the girl's face and manner what had been told and what concealed. "Did you strike him?" "Has he said that I struck him?" "No, mamma, but something has been done that should not have been done. I know it. He sent you a message, mamma." "What was it?" asked the Countess in a hoarse voice. "That he was hurt, but not seriously." "Oh, he said that." "I fear he is hurt seriously." "But he said that he was not." "Yes, and that the less said the sooner mended." "Did he say that too?" "That was his message." The Countess gave a long sigh, then sobbed, and at last broke out into hysteric tears. It was evident to her now that the man was sparing her, was endeavouring to spare her. He had told no one as yet. The least said the soonest mended. Oh yes, if he would say never a word to any one of what had occurred between them that day, that would be best for her. But how could he not tell? When some doctor should ask him how he had come by that wound, surely he would tell then. It could not be possible that such a deed should have been done there in that little room, and that no one should know it. And why should he not tell, he who was her enemy? Had she caught him at an advantage, would she not have smote him hip and thigh? And then she reflected what it would be to owe perhaps her life to the mercy of Daniel Thwaite, to the mercy of her enemy, of him who knew, if no one else should know, that she had attempted to murder him. It would be better for her, should she be so spared to do so, to go away to some distant land where she might hide her head for ever. "May I go to him, mamma, to see him?" Lady Anna asked. The Countess, full of her own thoughts, sat silent, answering not a word. "I know where he lives, mamma, and I fear that he is much hurt." "He will not die," muttered the Countess. "God forbid that he should die, but I will go to him." Then she returned upstairs without a word of opposition from her mother, put on her bonnet, and sallied forth. No one stopped her, or said a word to her now, and she seemed to herself to be as free as air. She walked up to the corner of Gower Street, and turned down into Bedford Square, passing the house of the sergeant. Then she asked her way into Great Russell Street, which she found to be hardly more than a stone's throw from the sergeant's door, and soon found the number at which her lover lived. No, Mr. Thwaite was not at home. Yes, she might wait for him, but he had no room but his bedroom. Then she became very bold. "I am engaged to be his wife," she said. "Are you the Lady Anna?" asked the woman who had heard the story. Then she was received with great distinction and invited to sit down in a parlour on the ground floor. There she sat for 3 hours, motionless, alone, waiting, waiting, waiting. When it was quite dark, at about 6 o'clock, Daniel Thwaite entered the room with his left arm bound up. "My girl," he said, with so much joy in his tone that she could not but rejoice to hear him. "So you have found me out and have come to me?" "Yes, I have come. Tell me what it is. I know that you are hurt." "I've been hurt, certainly. The doctor wanted me to go into a hospital, but I trust that I may escape that. But I must take care of myself. I had to come back here in a coach, because the men told me not to walk." "How was it, Daniel? Oh, Daniel, you will tell me everything?" Then she sat beside him as he lay upon the couch, and listened to him while he told her the whole story. He hid nothing from her, but as he went on he made her understand that it was his intention to conceal the whole deed, to say nothing of it, so that the perpetrator should escape punishment, if it might be possible. She listened in awe-struck silence as she heard the tale of her mother's guilt, and he, with wonderful skill, with hearty love for the girl, and in true mercy to her feelings, palliated the crime of the would-be murderess. "She was beside herself with grief and emotion," he said, "and has hardly surprised me about what she has done. Had I thought of it, I should almost have expected it." "She may do it again, Daniel." "I think not. She will be cowed now and quarter. She did not interfere when you told her you were coming to me. It will be a lesson to her, and so it may be good for us." Then he bade her to tell her mother that he, as far as he was concerned, would hold his peace. If she would forget all past injuries, so would he. If she would hold out her hand to him, he would take it. If she could not bring herself to do this, could not bring herself as yet, then let her go apart. No notice should be taken of what she had done. "But she must not again stand between us," he said. "Nothing shall stand between us," said Lady Anna. Then he told her, laughing as he did so, how hard it had been for him to keep the story of his wound secret from the doctor, who had already extracted the ball and was to visit him on the morrow. The practitioner to whom he had gone, knowing nothing of gunshot wounds, had taken him to a first-class surgeon, and the surgeon had of course asked as to the cause of the wound. Daniel had said that it was an accident as to which he could not explain the cause. "You mean you will not tell?" said the surgeon. "Exactly so. I will not tell. It is my secret. That I did not do it myself you may judge from the spot in which I was shot." To this the surgeon assented, and though he pressed the question and said something as to the necessity for an investigation, he could get no satisfaction. However, he had learned Daniel's name and address. He was to call on the morrow, and would then perhaps succeed in learning something of the mystery. "In the meantime, my darling, I must go to bed, for it seems as though every bone in my body was sore. I brought an old woman with me who is to look after me." Then she left him, promising that she would come on the morrow and would nurse him. "Unless they lock me up, I will be here," she said. Daniel Thwaite thought that in the present circumstances Chapter 45 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 45. The Lawyers Agree. When a month had passed by, a great many people knew how Mr. Daniel Thwaite had come by the wound in his back, but nobody knew it officially. There is a wide difference in the qualities of knowledge regarding such matters. In affairs of public interest we often know, or fancy that we know, down to every exact detail, how a thing has been done, who have been given the bribes and who have taken them, who has told the lie and who has pretended to believe it, who has peculated and how the public purse has suffered, who was in love with such a one's wife and how the matter was detected, then smothered up and condoned. But there is no official knowledge, and nothing can be done. The tailor and the earl, the countess and her daughter, have become public property since the great trial had been commenced, and many eyes were on them. Before a week had gone by, it was known in every club and in every great drawing-room that the tailor had been shot in the shoulder, and it was almost known that the pistol had been fired by the hands of the countess. The very eminent surgeon into whose hands Daniel had luckily fallen did not press his questions very far when his patient told him that it would be for the welfare of many people that nothing further should be asked on the matter. "An accident has occurred," said Daniel, "as to which I do not intend to say anything further. I can assure you that no injury has been done beyond that which I suffer." The eminent surgeon no doubt spoke of the matter among his friends, but he always declared that he had no certain knowledge as to the hand which fired the pistol. The women in Keppel Street of course talked. There had certainly been a smoke and a smell of gunpowder. Mrs. Richards had heard nothing. Sarah thought that she had heard a noise. They both were sure that Daniel Thwaite had been much the worse for drink, a statement which led to considerable confusion. No pistol was ever seen, though the weapon remained in the old desk for some days, and was at last conveyed out of the house when the Countess left it with all her belongings. She had been afraid to hide it more stealthily, or even throw it away, lest her doing so should be discovered. Had the law interfered, had any search warrant been granted, the pistol would of course have been found. As it was, no one asked the Countess a question on the subject. The lawyers, who had been her friends and had endeavoured to guide her through her difficulties, became afraid of her, and kept aloof from her. They had all gone over to the opinion that Lady Anna should be allowed to marry the tailor, and had on that account become her enemies. She was completely isolated, and was now spoken of mysteriously, as a woman who had suffered much and was nearly mad with grief, as a violent, determined, dangerous being, who was interesting as a subject for conversation, but one not at all desirable as an acquaintance. During the whole of this month the Countess remained in Keppel Street, and was hardly ever seen by any but the inmates of that house. Lady Anna had returned home all alone on the evening of the day on which the deed had been done, after leaving her lover in the hands of the old nurse with whose services he had been furnished. The rain was still falling as she came through Russell Square. The distance was indeed short, but she was wet and cold and draggled when she returned, and the criminality of the deed which her mother had committed had come fully home to her mind during the short journey. The door was opened to her by Mrs. Richards, and she at once asked for the Countess. "Lady Anna, where have you been?" asked Mrs. Richards, who was learning to take upon herself during these troubles something of the privilege of finding fault. But Lady Anna put her aside without a word, and went into the parlour. There sat the Countess just as she had been left, except that a pair of candles stood upon the table, and that the tea-things had been laid there. "You're all wet," she said. "Where have you been?" "He has told me all," the girl replied, without answering the question. "Oh, mamma, how could you do it?" "Who has driven me to it? It has been you. You. Well, what else?" "Mamma, he has forgiven you." "Forgiven me? I will not have his forgiveness." "Oh, mamma, if I forgive you, will you not be friends with us?" She stooped over her mother and kissed her, and then went on and told her what she had to tell. She stood and told it all in a low voice, so that no ear but that of her mother should hear her. How the ball had hit him, how it had been extracted, how nothing had been and nothing should be told, how Daniel would forgive it all and be her friend, if she would let him. "But, mamma, I hope you will be sorry." The Countess sat silent, moody, grim, with her eyes fixed on the table. She would say nothing. "And, mamma, I must go to him every day, to do things for him and to help to nurse him. Of course he will be my husband now." Still the Countess said not a word, either of approval or of dissent. Lady Anna sat down for a moment or two, hoping that her mother would allow her to eat and to drink in the room, and that thus they might again begin to live together. But not a word was spoken, nor a motion made, and the silence became awful, so that the girl did not dare to keep her seat. "Shall I go, mamma?" she said. "Yes, you had better go." After that they did not see each other again on that evening, and during the week or 10 days following they lived apart. On the following morning, after an early breakfast, Lady Anna went to Great Russell Street, and there she remained the greater part of the day. The people of the house understood that the couple were to be married as soon as their lodger should be well, and had heard much of the magnificence of the marriage. They were kind and good, and the tailor declared very often that this was the happiest period of his existence. Of all the good turns ever done to him, he said, the wound in his back had been the best. As his sweetheart sat by his bedside, they planned their future life. They would still go to the distant land on which his heart was set, though it might be only for a while. And she, with playfulness, declared that she would go there as Mrs. Thwaite. "I suppose they can't prevent me calling myself Mrs. Thwaite, if I please." "I'm not so sure of that," said the tailor. "Evil burrs stick fast." It would be vain now to tell of all the sweet lovers' words that were spoken between them during those long hours. But the man believed that no girl had ever been so true to her lover through so many difficulties as Lady Anna had been to him, and she was sure that she had never varied in her wish to become the wife of the man who had first asked her for her love. She thought much, and she thought often of the young lord, but she took the impress of her lover's mind, and learned to regard her cousin, the Earl, as an idle, pretty popinjay, born to eat, to drink, and to carry sweet perfumes. "Just a butterfly," said the tailor. "One of the brightest butterflies," said the girl. "A woman should not be a butterfly, not altogether a butterfly," he answered. "But for a man it is surely a contemptible part. Do you remember the young man who comes to Hotspur on the battlefield, or him whom the king sent to Hamlet after the wager? When I saw Lord Lovell at his breakfast table, I thought of them. I said to myself that spermaceti was the sovereignest thing on earth for an inward wound, and I told myself that he was of very soft society and great showing." She smiled, though she did not know the words he quoted. and assured him that her poor cousin Lord Lovell would not trouble him much in the days that were to come. "He will not trouble me at all, but as he is your cousin, I would fain that he would call me a man. He had a sort of gown on, which would have made a grand frock for you, sweetheart. Only too smart, I fear, for my wife." She laughed, and was pleased, and remembered without a shade either of regret or remorse the manner in which the popinjay had helped her over the stepping-stones at Bolton Abbey. But the tailor, though he thus scorned the lord, was quite willing that a share of the property should be given up to him. "Unless you did, how on earth could he wear such grand gowns as that? I can understand that he wants it more than I do, and if there are to be earls, I suppose they should be rich. We do not want it, my girl." "You will have half, Daniel," she said. "As far as that goes, I do not want a doit of it, not a penny piece. When they paid me what became my own by my father's will, I was rich enough for you and me too, my girl, if that was all. But it is better that it should be divided. If he had it all, he would buy too many gowns, and it may be that with us some good will come of it. As far as I can see, no good comes of money spent on race-courses and in gorgeous gowns." This went on from day to day throughout a month, and every day Lady Anna took her place with her lover. After a while her mother came up into the drawing-room in Keppel Street, and then the two ladies again lived together. Little or nothing, however, was said between them as to their future lives. The Countess was quiet, sullen, and to a bystander would have appeared to be indifferent. She had been utterly vanquished by the awe inspired by her own deed, and by the fear which had lasted for some days that she might be dragged to trial for the offence. As that dread subsided, she was unable to recover her former spirits. She spoke no more of what she had done and what she had suffered, but seemed to submit to the inevitable. She said nothing of any future life that might be in store for her, and, as far as her daughter could perceive, had no plans formed for the coming time. At last Lady Anna found it necessary to speak of her own plans. "Mamma," she said, "Mr. Thwaite wishes that banns should be read in church for our marriage." "Banns!" exclaimed the Countess. "Yes, mamma, he thinks it best." The Countess made no further observation. If the thing was to be, it mattered little to her whether they were to be married by banns or by licence, whether her girl should walk down to church like a maid-servant, or be married with all the pomp and magnificence to which her rank and wealth might entitle her. How could there be splendour, how even decency, in such a marriage as this? She at any rate would not be present, let them be married in what way they would. On the fourth Sunday after the shot had been fired, the banns were read for the first time in Bloomsbury Church, and the future bride was described as Anna Lovell, commonly called Lady Anna Lovell, spinster. Neither on that occasion nor on either of the two further callings did anyone get up in church to declare that impediment existed why Daniel Thwaite the tailor and Lady Anna Lovell should not be joined together in holy matrimony. In the meantime, the lawyers had been at work dividing the property, and in the process of doing so it had been necessary that Mr. Gough should have various interviews with the Countess. She also, as the undisputed widow of the late intestate Earl, was now a very rich woman, with an immense income at her control. But no one wanted assistance from her. There was her revenue, and she was doomed to live apart with it in her solitude, with no fellow creature to rejoice with her in her triumph, with no dependent whom she could make happy with her wealth. She was a woman with many faults, but covetousness was not one of them. If she could have given it all to the young Earl, and her daughter with it, she would have been a happy woman. Had she been permitted to dream that it was all so settled that her grandchild would become of all Earl Lovells the most wealthy and most splendid, she would have triumphed indeed. But as it was, there was no spot in her future career brighter to her than those long years of suffering which she had passed in the hope that some day her child might be successful. triumph indeed. There was nothing before her but solitude and shame. Nevertheless, she listened to Mr. Goff, and signed the papers that were put before her. When, however, he spoke to her of what was necessary for the marriage, as to the settlement which must, Mr. Goff said, be made as to the remaining moiety of her daughter's property, she answered curtly that she knew nothing of that. Her daughter's affairs were no concern of hers. She had indeed worked hard to establish her daughter's rights, but her daughter was now of age and could do as she pleased with her own. She would not even remain in the room while the matter was being discussed. "Lady Anne and I have separate interests," she said haughtily. Lady Anna herself simply declared that half of her estate should be made over to her cousin, and that the other half should go to her husband. But the attorney was not satisfied to take instructions on a matter of such moment from one so young. As to all that was to appertain to the Earl, the matter was settled. The Solicitor-General and Sergeant Bluestone had acceded to the arrangement, and the Countess herself had given her assent before she had utterly separated her own interests from those of her daughter. In regard to so much, Mr. Goff could go to work in conjunction with Mr. Flick without a scruple. But as to that other matter, there must be consultations, conferences, and solemn debate. The young lady, no doubt, might do as she pleased, but lawyers can be very powerful. Sir William was asked for his opinion, and suggested that Daniel Thwaite himself should be invited to attend at Mr. Goff's chambers as soon as his wound would allow him to do so. Daniel, who did not care for his wound so much as he should have done, was with Mr. Goff on the following morning, and heard a lengthy explanation from the attorney. The Solicitor-General had been consulted. This Mr. Goff said, feeling that a tailor would not have a word to say against so high an authority. The Solicitor-General had been consulted, and was of opinion that Lady Anna's interests should be guarded with great care. A very large property, he might say a splendid estate, was concerned. Mr. Thwaite of course understood that the family had been averse to this marriage, naturally very averse. Now, however, they were prepared to yield. The tailor interrupted the attorney at this period of his speech. "We don't want anybody to yield, Mr. Goff. We're going to do what we please, and don't know anything about yielding." Mr. Goff remarked that all that might be very well, but that as so large a property was at stake, the friends of the lady, according to all usage, were bound to interfere. A settlement had already been made in regard to the Earl. "You mean, Mr. Goff, that Lady Anna has given her cousin half her money?" The attorney went on to say that Mr. Thwaite might put it that way if he pleased. The deeds had already been executed. With regard to the other moiety, Mr. Thwaite could no doubt not object to a trust deed, by which it should be arranged that the money should be invested in land, the interest to be appropriated to the use of Lady Anna, and the property to be settled on the eldest son. Mr. Thwaite would, of course, have the advantage of the income during his wife's life. The attorney, in explaining all this, made an exceedingly good legal exposition, and then waited for the tailor's assent. "Are those Lady Anna's instructions?" Mr. Goff replied that the proposal was made in accordance with the advice of the Solicitor-General. "I'll have nothing to do with such a settlement," said the tailor. "Lady Anna has given away half her money, and may give away the whole if she pleases. She will be the same to me whether she comes full-handed or empty. But when she is my wife, her property shall be my property, and when I die there shall be no such abomination as an eldest son." Mr. Goff was persuasive, eloquent, indignant, and very wise. All experience, all usage, all tradition required that there should be some such settlement as he had suggested. But it was in vain. "I don't want my wife to have anything of her own before marriage," said he, "but she certainly shall have nothing after marriage, independent of me." For a man with sound views of domestic power and marital rights always choose a radical. In this case there was no staying him. The girl was all on his side, and Mr. Goff, with infinite grief, was obliged to content himself with binding up a certain portion of the property to make an income for the widow, should the tailor die before his wife. And thus the tailor's marriage received the sanction of all the lawyers. A day or two after this, Daniel Thwaite called upon the Countess. It was now arranged that they should be married early in July, and questions had arisen as to the manner of the ceremony. Who should give away the bride? Of what nature should the marriage be? Should there be any festival? Should there be bridesmaids? Where should they go when they were married? What dresses should be bought? After what fashion should they be prepared to live? Those and questions of a like nature required to be answered, and Lady Anna felt that these matters should not be fixed without some reference to her mother. It had been her most heartfelt desire to reconcile the Countess to the marriage, to obtain at any rate so much recognition as would enable her mother to be present in the church. But the Countess had altogether refused to speak on the subject, and had remained silent, gloomy, and impenetrable. Then Daniel had himself proposed that he would see her, and on a certain morning he called. He sent up his name with his compliments, and the Countess allowed him to be shown into her room. Lady Anna had begged that it might be so, and she had yielded without positive assent, as she had now done in all matters relating to this disastrous marriage. On that morning, however, she had spoken a word. "If Mr. Thwaite chooses to see me, I must be alone." And she was alone when the tailor was shown into the room. Up to that day he had worn his arm in a sling, and should then have continued to do so. But on this visit of peace to her who had attempted to be his murderer, he put aside this outward sign of the injury she had inflicted on him. He smiled as he entered the room, and she rose to receive him. She was no longer a young woman, and no woman of her age or of any other had gone through rougher usage, but she could not keep the blood out of her cheeks as her eyes met his, nor could she summon to her support that hard persistency of outward demeanour with which she had intended to arm herself for the occasion. "So you've come to see me, Mr. Thwaite?" she said. "I've come, Lady Lovell, to shake hands with you, if it may be so, before my marriage with your daughter. It is her wish that we should be friends, and mine also." So saying, he put out his hand, and the Countess slowly gave him hers. "I hope the time may come, Lady Lovell, when all animosity may be forgotten between you and me, and nothing be borne in mind but the old friendship of former years." "I do not know that can be," she said. "I hope it may be so. Time cures all things, and I hope it may be so." "There are sorrows, Mr. Thwaite, which no time can cure. You have triumphed, and can look forward to the pleasures of success. I have been foiled and beaten and broken to pieces. With me the last is worse even than the first. I do not know that I can ever have another friend. Your father was my friend, and I will be so also. You have been my enemy. All that he did to help me, all that others have done since to forward me on my way, has been brought to nothing by you. My joys have been turned to grief, my rank has been made a disgrace, my wealth has become like ashes between my teeth, and it has been your doing. They tell me that you will be my daughter's husband. I know that it must be so, but I do not see that you can be my friend. I had hoped to find you softer, Lady Lovell. It is not my nature to be soft. All this has not tended to make me soft. If my daughter will let me know from time to time that she is alive, that is all that I shall require of her. As to her future career, I cannot interest myself in it as I had hoped to do. Good-bye, Mr. Thwaite. You need fear no further interference from me." So the interview was over. Chapter 46 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 46. Hard Lines. At the time that the murder was attempted, Lord Lovell was in London, and had seen Daniel Thwaite on that morning. But before any confirmed rumour had reached his ears, he had left London again on his road to Yoxham. He knew now that he would be endowed with something like 10,000 a year out of the wealth of the late Earl, but that he would not have the hand of his fair cousin, the late Earl's daughter. Perhaps it was as well as it was. The girl had never loved him, and he could now choose for himself, and need not choose till it should be his pleasure to settle himself as a married man. After all, his marriage with Lady Anna would have been a constrained marriage, a marriage which he would have accepted as the means of making his fortune. The girl certainly had pleased him, but it might be that a girl who preferred a tailor would not have continued to please him. At any rate, he could not be unhappy with his newly acquired fortune, and he went down to Yoxham to receive the congratulation of his friends, thinking that it would become him now to make some exertion towards reconciling his uncle and aunt to the coming marriage. "Have you heard anything about Mr. Thwaite?" Mr. Flick said to him the day before he started. The Earl had heard nothing. "They say that he has been wounded by a pistol ball." Lord Lovell stayed some days at a friend's house on his road into Yorkshire, and when he reached the rectory, the rector had received news from London. Mr. Thwaite the tailor had been murdered, and it was surmised that the deed had been done by the Countess. "I trust the papers were signed before you left London," said the anxious rector. The documents making over the property were all right, but the Earl would believe nothing of the murder. Mr. Thwaite might have been wounded. He had heard so much before, but he was quite sure that it had not been done by the Countess. On the following day further tidings came. Mr. Thwaite was doing well, but everybody said that the attempt had been made by Lady Lovell. Thus, by degrees, some idea of the facts as they had occurred was received at the rectory. "You don't mean that you want us to have Mr. Thwaite here?" said the rector, holding up his hands upon hearing a proposition made to him by his nephew a day or two later. "Why not, Uncle Charles?" "I couldn't do it. I really don't think your aunt could bring herself to sit down to table with him." "Aunt Jane?" "Yes, your Aunt Jane, or your Aunt Julia either." Now a quieter lady than Aunt Jane, or one less likely to turn up her nose at any guest whom her husband should choose to entertain, did not exist. "May I ask my aunt?" "Oh, what good can it do, Frederick?" "He's going to marry our cousin. He's not at all such a man as you seem to think." "He's been a journeyman tailor all his life." "You'll find he'll make a very good sort of gentleman. Sir William Paterson says that he'll be in Parliament before long." Sir William is always meddling. I've never thought much about Sir William." "Come, Uncle Charles, you should be fair. If we had gone on quarrelling and going to law, where should I have been now? I should never have got a shilling out of the property. Everybody says so. No doubt Sir William acted very wisely." "Well, I'm no lawyer. I can't say how it might have been. But I may have my doubts if I like. I've always understood that Lady Lovell, as you choose to call her, was never Lord Lovell's wife. For 20 years I've been sure of it, and I can't change so quickly as some other people." "She is Lady Lovell now. The King and Queen would receive her as such if she went to court. Her daughter is Lady Anna Lovell." "It may be so. It is possible." "If it be not so," said the young lord, thumping the table, "where have I got the money from?" This was an argument that the rector could not answer, so he merely shook his head. "I am bound to acknowledge them after taking her money." "Yeah, but not him. You haven't had any of his money. You needn't acknowledge him." "We had better make the best of it, Uncle Charles. He is going to marry our cousin, and we should stand by her. Sir William very strongly advises me to be present at the marriage, and to offer to give her away." "The girl you are going to marry yourself?" "Or else that you should do it. That, of course, would be better." The rector of Yoxham groaned when the proposition was made to him. What infinite vexation of spirit and degradation had come to him from these spurious Lovells during the last 12 months! He'd been made to have the girl in his house and to give her precedence as Lady Anna, though he did not believe in her. He had been constrained to treat her as the desired bride of his august nephew the Earl, till she had refused the Earl's hand. After he had again repudiated her and her mother because of her base attachment to a low-born artisan, he had been made to re-accept her in spirit because she had been generous to his nephew, and now he was asked to stand at the altar and give her away to the tailor. And there could come to him neither pleasure nor profit from the concern. All that he had endured he had borne simply for the sake of his family and his nephew. "She is degrading us all as far as she belongs to us," said the rector. "I can't see why I should be asked to give her my countenance in doing it." "Everybody says that it is very good of her to be true to the man she loved when she was poor and in obscurity. Sir William says—" "Bah, Sir William!" muttered the rector between his teeth as he turned away in disgust. What had been the first word of that minatory speech Lord Lovell did not clearly hear. He had been brought up as a boy by his uncle, and had never known his uncle to offend by swearing. No one in Yoxham would have believed it possible that the parson of the parish should have done so. Mrs. Grimes would have given evidence in any court in Yorkshire that it was absolutely impossible. The Archbishop would not have believed it, though his Archdeacon had himself heard the word. All the man's known antecedents since he had been at Yoxham were against the probability. The entire close at York would have been indignant had such an accusation been made. But his nephew, in his heart of hearts, believed that the rector of Yoxham had damned the Solicitor General. There was, however, more cause for malediction and further provocations to wrath in store for the rector. The Earl had not as yet opened all his budget, or let his uncle know the extent of the sacrifice that was to be demanded from him. Sir William had been very urgent with the young nobleman to accord everything that could be accorded to his cousin. "It is not, of course, for me to dictate," he had said, "but as I have been allowed so far to give advice somewhat beyond the scope of my profession, perhaps you will let me say that in mere honesty you are all that you can give. She has shared everything with you, and need have given nothing. And he, my lord, had he been so minded, might no doubt have hindered her from doing what she has done. You owe it to your honour to accept her and her husband with an open hand. Unless you can treat her with cousinly regard, you should not have taken what has been given to you as a cousin. She has recognised you to your great advantage as the head of her family, and you should certainly recognise her as belonging to it. Let the marriage be held down at Yoxham. Get your uncle and aunt to ask her down. Do you give her away, and let your uncle marry them. If you can put me up for a night in some neighbouring farmhouse, I'll come and be a spectator. It will be for your honour to treat her after that fashion." The programme was a large one, and the Earl felt that there might be some difficulty. But in the teeth of that dubious malediction he persevered, and his next attack was upon Aunt Julia. "You liked her, did you not?" "Yes, I liked her." The tone implied great doubt. "I liked her till I found that she had forgotten herself." "But she didn't forget herself. She just did what any girl would have done, living as she was living. She has behaved nobly to me." "She has behaved, no doubt, conscientiously." "Oh, come, Aunt Julia. Did you ever know any other woman to give away 10,000 a year to a fellow simply because he was her cousin? We should do something for her. Why should you not ask her down here again?" "I don't think my brother would like it." "He will if you tell him. And we must make a gentleman of him." "My dear Frederick, you can never wash a blackamoor white." "Let us try. Don't you oppose it. It behoves me, for my honour, to show her some regard after what she has done for me." Aunt Julia shook her head, and muttered to herself some further remark about negroes. The inhabitants of the Yoxham Rectory, who were well-born, ladies and gentlemen without a stain, who were hitherto free from all base intermarriages, and had nothing among their male cousins besides soldiers and sailors, parsons and lawyers, who had successfully opposed an intended marriage between a cousin in the 3rd degree and an attorney, because the alliance was below the level of the Lovells, were peculiarly averse to any intermingling of ranks. They were descended from ancient earls, and their chief was an earl of the present day. there was but one titled young lady now among them, and she had only just won her right to be so considered. There was but one Lady Anna, and she was going to marry a tailor. "Duty is duty," said Aunt Julia, as she hurried away. She meant her nephew to understand that duty commanded her to shut her heart against any cousin who could marry a tailor. The lord next attacked Aunt Jane. "You wouldn't mind having her here?" "Not if your uncle thought well of it," said Mrs. Lovell. "I'll tell you what my scheme is." Then he told it all. Lady Anna was to be invited to the rectory. The tailor was to be entertained somewhere near on the night preceding his wedding. The marriage was to be celebrated by his uncle in Yoxham Church. Sir William was to be asked to join them, and the whole thing was to be done exactly as though they were all proud of the connection. "Does your uncle know?" asked Mrs. Lovell, who had been nearly stunned by the proposition. "Not quite. I want you to suggest it. Only think, Aunt Jane, what she has done for us all." Aunt Jane couldn't think that very much had been done for her. They were not to be enriched by the cousin's money. They had never been interested in the matter on their own account. They wanted nothing. And yet they were to be called upon to have a tailor at their board, because Lord Lovell was the head of their family. But the Earl was the Earl, and poor Mrs. Lovell knew how much she owed to his position. "If you wish it, of course I'll tell him, Frederick." "I do wish it, and I'll be so much obliged to you." The next morning the parson had been told all that was required of him, and he came down to prayers as black as a thundercloud. It had been suggested to him that he should give the bride away, and though he had grievously complained of the request, he knew that he must do it should the Earl still demand it. He had no power to oppose the head of the family, but he had never thought then that he would be asked to pollute his own rectory by the presence of that odious tailor. While he was shaving that morning, very religious ideas had filled his mind. What a horrible thing was wickedness! All this evil had come upon him and his because the late Earl had been so very wicked a man. He had sworn to his wife that he would not bear it. He had done, and was ready to do more almost than any other uncle in England. But this he could not endure. Yet, when he was shaving and thinking with religious horror of the iniquities of that iniquitous old lord, he knew that he would have to yield. "I dare say they wouldn't come," said Aunt Julia. "He wouldn't like to be with us any more than we shall like to have him." There was some comfort in that hope, and trusting to it, the rector had yielded everything before the third day was over. "And I may ask Sir William?" said the Earl. "Of course we shall be glad to see Sir William Patterson, if you choose to invite him," said the rector, still oppressed by gloom. "Sir William Patterson is a gentleman, no doubt, and a man of high standing. Of course I and your aunt would be pleased to receive him. As a lawyer I don't think much of him, but that's nothing to do with it." It may be remarked here that though Mr. Lovell lived for a great many years after the transactions which are here recorded, he never gave way in reference to the case that had been tried. If the lawyers had persevered as they ought to have done, it would have been found out that the Countess was no Countess, that the Lady Anna was no Lady Anna, and that all the money belonged by right to the Earl. With that belief, with that profession of belief, he went to his grave an old man of 80. In the meantime, he consented that the invitation should be given. The Countess and her daughter were to be asked to Yoxham. The use of the parish church was to be offered for the ceremony. He was to propose to marry them, the Earl was to give the bride away, and Daniel Thwaite the tailor was to be asked to dine at Yoxham Rectory on the day before the marriage. The letters were to be written from the rectory by Aunt Julia, and the Earl was to add what he pleased for himself. "I suppose this sort of trial is sent to us for our good," said the rector. Chapter 47 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 47. Things arrange themselves. But the Countess never gave way an inch. The following was the answer which she returned to the note written to her by Aunt Julia. The Countess Lovell presents her compliments to Miss Lovell. The Countess disapproves altogether of the marriage which is about to take place between Lady Anna Lovell and Mrs. Daniel Thwaite, and will take no part in the ceremony. "By heaven, she's the best Lovell of us all," said the rector, when he read the letter. This reply was received at Yoxham 3 days before any answer came either from Lady Anna or from the tailor. Daniel had received his communication from the young lord, who called him "Dear Mr. Thwaite," who had written quite familiarly about the coming nuptials with his cousin Anna, had bade him come down and join the family like a good fellow, and had signed himself, "Yours always most sincerely, Lovell." "It almost takes my breath away," said the tailor to his sweetheart, laughing. "They are cousins, you know," said Lady Anna, "and there was a little girl there I loved so much." "They can't but despise me, you know," said the tailor. "Why should anyone despise you?" "No one should, unless I be mean and despicable. But they do, you may be sure. It is only human nature that they should. We are made of different fabric, though the stuff was originally the same. I don't think I should be at my ease with them. I should be half afraid of their guilt and their gingerbread, and should be ashamed of myself because I was so. I should not know how to drink wine with them, and should do 100 things which would make them think me a beast." "I don't see why you shouldn't hold up your head with any man in England," said Lady Anna. "And so I ought, but I shouldn't. I should be awed by those whom I feel to be my inferiors. I'd rather not. We'd better keep ourselves to ourselves, dear." But the girl begged for some delay. It was a matter that required to be considered. If it were necessary for her to quarrel with all her cousins for the sake of her husband, with the bright, fainéant young earl, with aunts Jane and Julia, with her darling Minnie, she would do so. The husband should be to her in all respects the first and foremost. For his sake, now that she had resolved that she would be his, she would if necessary separate herself from all the world. She had withstood the prayers of her mother, and she was sure that nothing else could move her. But if the cousins were willing to accept her husband, why should he not be willing to be accepted? Pride in him might be as weak as pride in them. If they would put out their hands to him, why should he refuse to put out his own? "Give me a day, Daniel, to think about it." He gave her the day, and then that great decider of all things, Sir William, came to him, congratulating him, bidding him to be of good cheer, and saying fine things of the Lovell family generally. Our tailor received him courteously, having learned to like the man, understanding that he had behaved with honesty and wisdom in regard to his client, and respecting him as one of the workers of the day. But he declared that for the Lovell family, as a family, he did not care for them particularly. "They are poles asunder from me," he said. "Not so," replied Sir William. "They were poles asunder, if you will, but by your good fortune and merit, if you will allow me to say so, you have travelled from the one pole very far towards the other." "I like my own pole a great deal the best, Sir William." "I am an older man than you, Mr. Thwaite, and allow me to assure you that you are wrong." "Wrong in preferring those who work for their bread to those who eat it in idleness?" "No, not that, but wrong in thinking that there is not hard work done at the one pole as well as at the other, and wrong also in not having perceived that the best men who come up from age to age are always migrating from that pole which you say you prefer to the Antipodean pole to which you are tending yourself. I can understand your feeling of contempt for an idle lordling, but you should remember that lords have been made lords in 9 cases out of 10 for good work done by them for the benefit of their country." "Why should the children of lords be such to the 10th and 20th generation?" come into Parliament, Mr. Thwaite, and if you have views on that subject opposed to hereditary peerages, express them there. It's a fair subject for argument. At present, I think that the sense of the country is in favour of an aristocracy of birth. But, be that as it may, do not allow yourself to despise that condition of society which it is the ambition of all men to enter. It is not my ambition. Pardon me. When you were a workman among workmen, did you not wish to be their leader? When you were foremost among them, did you not wish to be their master? If you were a master tradesman, would you not wish to lead and guide your brother tradesmen? Would you not desire wealth, in order that you might be assisted by it in your views of ambition? If you were an alderman in your borough, would you not wish to be the mayor? If mayor, would you not wish to be its representative in Parliament? If in Parliament, would you not wish to be heard there? Would you not then clothe yourself as those among you who lived, eat as they ate, drink as they drank, keep their hours, fall into their habits, and be one of them? The theory of equality is very grand. The grandest thing in the world, Sir William. It is one to which all legislative and all human efforts should and must tend. All that is said and all that is done among people that have emancipated themselves from the thraldom of individual aggrandisement serve to diminish to some degree the distance between the high and the low. But could you establish absolute equality in England tomorrow, as it was to have been established in France some half-century ago, the inequality of men's mind and character would re-establish an aristocracy within 20 years. The energetic, the talented, the honest, and the unselfish will always be moving towards an aristocratic side of society, because their virtues will beget esteem, and esteem will beget wealth, and wealth gives power for good offices. As when one man throws away 40,000 a year on racecourses. When you make much water boil, Mr. Thwaite, some of it will probably boil over. When 2 men run a race, some strength must be wasted in fruitless steps beyond the goal. It is the fault of many patriotic men that, in their desire to put down the evils which exist, they will see only the power that is wasted, and have no eyes for the good work done. The subject is so large that I should like to discuss it with you when we have more time. For the present, let me beg of you, for your own sake as well as for her who is to be your wife, that you will not repudiate civility offered to you by her family. It will show a higher manliness in you to go among them, and accept among them the position which your wife's wealth and your own acquirements will give you, than to stand aloof moodily because they are aristocrats. You can make yourself understood when you speak, Sir William. I'm glad to hear you say so, said the lawyer, smiling. I cannot, and so you have the best of me. But you can't make me like a lord, or think that a young man ought to wear a silk gown. I quite agree with you that the silk gowns should be kept for their elders. And so the conversation was ended. Daniel Thwaite had not been made to look like a lord, but the eloquence of the urbane lawyer was not wasted on him. Thinking of it all, as he wandered alone through the streets, he began to believe that it would be more manly to do as he was advised than to abstain, because the doing of the thing would in itself be disagreeable to him. On the following day Lady Anna was with him as usual, for the pretext of his wound still afforded to her the means of paying to him those daily visits which in happier circumstances he would naturally have paid to her. "Would you like to go to Yoxham?" he said. She looked wistfully up into his face. With her there was a real wish that the poles might be joined together by her future husband. She had found, as she had thought of it, that she could not make herself either happy or contented except by marrying him, but it had not been without regret that she had consented to destroy altogether the link which bound her to the noble blood of the Lovels. She had been made to appreciate the sweet flavour of aristocratic influences, and now that the Lovels were willing to receive her in spite of her marriage, she was more than willing to accept their offered friendship. "If you really wish it, you shall go," he said. "But you must go also." "Yes, for one day. and I must have a pair of gloves and a black coat."
"And a blue one to be married in."
"Alas me! Must I have a pink silk gown to walk about in early in the morning?"
"You shall if you like, and I'll make it for you."
"I'd sooner see you darned my worsted stockings, sweetheart."
"I can do that too."
"And I shall have to go to church in a coach and come back in another, and all the people will smell sweet and make eyes at me behind my back, and wonder among themselves how the tailor will behave himself."
"The tailor must behave himself properly," said Lady Anna.
"That's just what he won't do, and can't do. I know you'll be ashamed of me, and then we shall both be unhappy."
"I won't be ashamed of you. I will never be ashamed of you. I will be ashamed of them if they are not good to you. But, Daniel, you shall not go if you do not like it. What does it all signify if you are not happy?"
"I will go," said he, "and now I'll sit down and write a letter to my lord." 2 letters were written, accepting the invitation. As that from the tailor to the lord was short and characteristic, it shall be given. "My dear lord, I am much obliged to you for your lordship's invitation to Yoxham, and if accepting it will make me a good fellow, I will accept it. I fear, however, that I can never be a proper fellow to your lordship. Not the less do I feel your courtesy, and I am, with all sincerity, your lordship's very obedient servant, Daniel Thwaite." Lady Anna's reply to Aunt Julia was longer and less sententious, but it signified her intention of going down to Yoxham a week before the day settled for the marriage, which was now the 10th of July. She was much obliged, she said, to the rector for his goodness in promising to marry them, and, as she had no friends of her own, she hoped that Minnie Lovel would be her bridesmaid. There were, however, sundry other letters before the ceremony was performed, and among them was one in which she was asked to bring Miss Alice Bluestone down with her, so that she might have one bridesmaid over and beyond those provided by the Yoxham aristocracy. To this arrangement Miss Alice Bluestone acceded joyfully, in spite of that gulf of which she had spoken, and so accompanied, but without her lady's maid, Lady Anna returned to Yoxham, that she might be there bound in holy matrimony to Daniel Thwaite. Chapter 48 of Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Simon Evers. Chapter 48. The Marriage. The marriage was nearly all that a marriage should be when Lady Anna is led to the hymeneal altar. As the ceremony was transferred from Bloomsbury, London, to Yoxham, in Yorkshire, a licence had been procured, and the banns of which Daniel Thwaite thought so much had been called in vain. Of course there are differences in aristocratic marriages. All earls' daughters are not married at St. George's, Hanover Square, nor is it absolutely necessary that a bishop should tie the knot, or that the dresses should be described in a newspaper. This was essentially a quiet marriage, but it was quiet with a splendid quietude, and the obscurity of it was graceful and decorous. As soon as the thing was settled, when it was a matter past doubt that all the Lovels were to sanction the marriage, the 2 aunts went to work heartily. Another Lovell girl, hardly more than seen before by any of the family, was gathered to the Lovell home as a 3rd bridesmaid, and for the 4th, who should officiate but the eldest daughter of Lady Fitzwarren? The Fitzwarrens were not rich, did not go to town annually, and the occasions for social brilliancy in the country are few and far between. Lady Fitzwarren did not like to refuse her old friend, Mrs. Lovell, and then Lady Anna was Lady Anna, or at any rate would be so, as far as the newspapers of the day were concerned. Miss Fitzwarren allowed herself to be attired in white and blue, and to officiate in the procession, having, however, assured her most intimate friend, Mr. Molins, that no consideration on earth should induce her to allow herself to be kissed by the tailor. In the week previous to the arrival of Daniel Thwaite, Lady Anna again ingratiated herself with the ladies at the rectory. During the days of her persecution she had been silent and apparently hard. but now she was again gentle, yielding, and soft.
"I do like her manner all the same," said Minnie. "Yes, my dear, it's a pity that it should be as it is to be, because she is very nice."
Minnie loved her friend, but thought it to be a thing of horror that her friend should marry a tailor. It was almost as bad as the story of the princess who had to marry a bear. Worse, indeed, for Minnie did not at all believe that the tailor would ever turn out to be a gentleman, whereas she had been sure from the first that the bear would turn into a prince. Daniel came to Yoxham, and saw very little of anybody at the rectory. He was taken in at the house of a neighbouring squire, where he dined as a matter of course. He did call at the rectory, and saw his bride, but on that occasion he did not even see the rector. The squire took him to the church in the morning, dressed in a blue frock coat, brown trousers, and a grey cravat. He was very much ashamed of his own clothes, but there was nothing about him to attract attention had not everybody known he was a tailor. The rector shook hands with him politely, but coldly. The ladies were more affectionate, and Minnie looked up into his face long and anxiously. "He wasn't very nice," she said afterwards, "but I thought he'd be worse than that." When the marriage was over, he kissed his wife, but made no attempt upon the bridesmaids. Then there was a breakfast at the rectory, which was a very handsome bridal banquet. On such occasions the part of the bride is always easily played. It is her duty to look pretty if she can, and should she fail in that, as brides usually do, her failure is attributed to the natural emotions of the occasion. The part of the bridegroom is more difficult. He should be manly, pleasant, composed, never flippant, able to say a few words when called upon, and quietly triumphant. This is almost more than mortal can achieve, and bridegrooms generally manifest some shortcomings at the awful moment. Daniel Thwaite was not successful. He was silent and almost morose. When Lady Fitzwarren congratulated him with high-flown words and a smile that was intended to combine something of ridicule with something of civility, he almost broke down in his attempt to answer her. "It's very good of you, my lady," said he. Then she turned her back and whispered a word to the parson, and Daniel was sure that she was laughing at him. The hero of the day was the Solicitor General. He made a speech proposing health and prosperity to the newly married couple. He referred, but just referred, to the trial, expressing the pleasure which all concerned had felt in recognizing the rights and ranks of the fair and noble bride, as soon as the facts of the case had come to their knowledge. Then he spoke of the truth and long-continued friendship and devoted constancy of the bridegroom and his father, saying that in the long experience of his life he had known nothing more touching or more graceful than the love which in early days had sprung up between the beautiful young girl and her earliest friend. He considered it to be among the happinesses of his life that he had been able to make the acquaintance of Mr. Daniel Thwaite, and he expressed a hope that he might long be allowed to regard that gentleman as his friend. There was much applause, in giving which the young girl was certainly the loudest. The rector could not bring himself to say a word. He was striving to do his duty by the head of his family, but he could not bring himself to say that the marriage between Lady Anna Lovell and the tailor was a happy event. Poor Daniel was compelled to make some speech in reply to his friend Sir William. "I'm bad at speaking," said he, "and I hope I shall be excused. I can only say that I am under deep obligation to Sir William Patterson for what he has done for my wife." The couple went away with a carriage and 4 horses to York, and the marriage was over. "I hope I've done right," said the rector in whispered confidence to Lady Fitzwarren. "I think you have, Mr. Lovell. I'm sure you have. The circumstances were very difficult, but I'm sure you've done right. She must always be considered as the legitimate child of her father." "They say so," murmured the rector sadly. "Just that. And as she will always be considered to be the Lady Anna, you were bound to treat her as you have done. It was a pity that it was not done earlier, so that she might have formed a worthier connection. The Earl, however, has not been altogether overlooked, and there is some comfort in that.
I dare say Mr. Thwaite may be a good sort of man though he is, not just what the family could have wished."
These words were undoubtedly spoken by her ladyship with much pleasure. The Fitzwarrens were poor, and the Lovels were all rich. Even the young Earl was now fairly well to do in the world, thanks to the generosity of the newly found cousin. It was therefore pleasant to Lady Fitzwarren to allude to the family misfortune, which must in some degree alloy the prosperity of her friends. Mr. Lovell understood it all, and sighed, but he felt no anger. He was grateful to Lady Fitzwarren for coming to his house at all on so mournful an occasion. And so we may bid farewell to Yoxham. The rector was an honest, sincere man, unselfish, true to his instincts, genuinely English, charitable, hospitable, a doer of good to those around him. In judging of such a character we find the difficulty of drawing the line between political sagacity and political prejudice. Had he been other than he was, he would probably have been less serviceable in his position. The bride and bridegroom went for their honeymoon into Devonshire, and on their road they passed through London. Lady Anna Thwaite, for she had not at least as yet been able to drop her title, wrote to her mother telling her of her arrival and requesting permission to see her. On the following day she went alone to Keppel Street and was admitted. "Dear, dear mamma," she said, throwing herself into the arms of her mother. "So it is done," said the Countess. "Yes, mamma, we are married. I wrote to you from York." "I got your letter, but I could not answer it. What could I say? I wish it had not been so. But it is done. You've chosen for yourself, and I will not reproach you." "Do not reproach me now, mamma." "It would be useless. I will bear my sorrows in silence, such as they are. Do not talk to me of him, but tell me what is the life that is proposed for you." They were to stay in the south of Devonshire for a month, and then to sail for the new colony founded at the Antipodes. As to any permanent mode of life, no definite plan has yet been formed. They were bound for Sydney, and when there, my husband, as Lady Anna called him, thinking that the word might be less painful to the ears of her mother than the name of the man who had become so odious to her, would do as should seem good to him. They would at any rate learn something of the new world that was springing up, and he would then be able to judge whether he had best serve the purpose that he had at heart by remaining there or by returning to England.
"And now, mamma, what will you do?"
"Nothing," said the Countess.
"But where will you live?"
"If I could only find out, my child, where I might die, I would tell you that."
"Oh, mamma, do not talk to me of dying."
"How should I talk of my future life, my dear? For what should I live? I have but you, and you have left me."
"Come with me, mamma."
"No, my dear, I could not live with him, nor he with me. It would be better that he and I should never see each other again."
"But you will not stay here?"
"No, I shall not stay here. I must use myself to solitude, but the solitude of London is unendurable. I shall go back to Cumberland if I can find a home there. The mountains will remind me of the days which, sad as they were less sad than the present. I little dreamed then that when I had gained everything, my loss would be so great as it has been. Was the Earl there?"
"At our marriage? Oh, yes, he was there."
"I shall ask him to do me a kindness. Perhaps he would let me live at Lovell Grange." When the meeting was over, Lady Anna returned to her husband, overwhelmed with tears. She was almost broken-hearted when she asked herself whether she had in truth been cruel to her mother. But she knew not how she could have done other than she had done. Her mother had endeavoured to conquer her by hard usage, and had failed. But nevertheless her heart was very sore. "My dear," said the tailor to her, "hearts will be sore. As the world goes yet awhile there must be injustice, and sorrow will follow." When they had been gone from London about a month, the Countess wrote to her cousin the Earl, and told him her wishes. "If you desire to live there, then of course that must be an end to it. But if not, you might let the old place to me. It will not be as if it were going out of the family. I will do what I can for the people around me, so that they may learn not to hate the name of Lovell." The young lord told her that she should have the use of the house as long as she pleased, for her lifetime, if it suited her to live there so long. As for rent, of course he could take none, after all that had been done for him. But the place should be leased to her, that she need not fear to be disturbed. When the springtime came, after the sailing of the vessel which took the tailor and his wife out to the Antipodes, Lady Lovell travelled down with her maids to Cumberland, leaving London without a friend to whom she could say adieu. And at Lovell Grange she took up her abode, amidst the old furniture and the old pictures, with everything to remind her of the black tragedy of her youth, when her husband had come to her and had told her, with a smile upon his lips and scorn in his eye, that she was not his wife, and that the child which she bore would be a bastard. Over his wicked words she had at any rate triumphed. Now she was living there in his house, the unquestioned and undoubted Countess Lovell, the mistress of much of his wealth, while still were living around her those who had known her when she was banished from her home. There, too, often with ill-directed generosity, she gave away her money, and became loved of the poor around her. But in the way of society she saw no human being, and rarely went beyond the valley in which stood the lonely house to which she had been brought as a bride. Of the further doings of Mr. Daniel Thwaite and his wife Lady Anna, of how they travelled and saw many things, and how he became perhaps a wiser man, the present writer may, he hopes, live to tell.